So we'll get started, and first of all, welcome to everybody, welcome to members of the public, and within the board, particular welcome to Tim Bishop, who is our new non-executive director, and there's a bit more about him when it comes to my chairman's report. I need to start off by giving a public apology on behalf of Manx Care, so I'm just going to read this out. This is a public apology to be made on behalf of the Board of Manx Care to the Information Commissioner. At the board meeting of Manx Care held in public on the 24th of May this year, the minutes of the board meeting held on 5th of April were approved, and it was subsequently brought to my attention by the Information Commissioner that the minutes of 5th of April contained wording which was factually inaccurate. During an update given by Mr. Andrew Guy at agenda item 48.22, the minutes state that the integration of primary care was being hampered by the inability to satisfy the ICO of the robustness of data sharing agreements that had been drafted by subject matter experts. The ICO was also making clinical judgments regarding the level of information that clinicians could access. Such delays could pose a threat to the transformation programme. The statement that the ICO was also making clinical judgments regarding the level of information that clinicians could access was not made by Mr. Guy or any other participant at the meeting. This statement is simply inaccurate. I wish to make clear that the Information Commissioner has not made any clinical judgments whatsoever. The reference to data sharing agreements is also inaccurate. The reference was to data sharing in general. And then we've got the full transcript of the discussion, which will be sent out with the minutes of this meeting. So I just wanted to make that public apology. Okay, there's a huge amount to get through this morning, so I will keep chivying people along, and I hope you'll take that in good part. So we'll start off with the declarations of interest, which are published here. Does anybody have anything to add to any of those? Are they still accurate and up to date? If there's no answer, I'll assume that's a yes. Then we've got the minutes of the last meeting, which is the 24th of May. Does anybody have any difficulties with the accuracy of these minutes? Andy, yes.
It may have been the way that I said something, Chair, but under the Mental Health Act Legislation Committee, it says the Association of Hospital Managers was understaffed and there were too few hearings taking place. That wasn't the sense that I intended to convey. It is difficult to recruit associate hospital managers, but what I was trying to say was that some hearings could be delayed, and that actually the low number doesn't aid in training new ones either. I think that's right, isn't it, Shri? So if we could just correct that slightly, I apologise, I think that's
correct
my error.
Accordingly, thank you. Anything else about the minutes? So other than that correction, can we record that we agree these minutes as being accurate? Thank you. We've then got the matters arising in action log, on which there's just one item, which was the review of the risk scoring, and it's been noted that the risks that we covered have been changed to a red score of 25, so that is now completed. Okay. Then we have the board assurance framework, which is reported as usual. I'd like to suggest that because we've got such a busy meeting today, we don't do this today, but in future I think we need to do a deep dive into a part of this each time. So we can perhaps start that process at the next meeting to go through each one. But in the meantime, if people do have any comment or questions, you're welcome. Okay, fine, so we'll receive that, but could you schedule that, Elaine, for next time, that we'll do them one at a time. So next week we come to my report, and I've already mentioned about welcoming Tim, our new non-executive director. We were very keen to bring to the non-executive side of the board somebody who had experience of social services and social care, which Tim absolutely fully does, plus many other things as well, of course, but it's good to welcome you, Tim. I think it's also particularly nice to be here in Ramsey. This is part of the policy of the board to go around the various geographical locations, and I think this is possibly the nicest location we've come to yet. This room is good and spacious. It's nice to see that there's plenty of public space as well. Don't feel quite as crowded as we have in some of the other ones, so that's excellent. And then I talked about a visit which was quite a while ago now, because we haven't had a board meeting during the 2 summer months, but to see the facilities at Tall Trees, which was truly excellent. So I think we'll move on now to Your report, Teresa.
Thank you, Chairman. So my report has several components to it. As usual, we produce a horizon scan which details a lot of the activity and progress that is being made across the operational care groups of Manx Care. I won't go into detail, but I think this absolutely highlights the amount of really good work going on across the care groups. I just wanted to recognise that the autumn booster campaign, the vaccine programme, does commence on the 5th of September. There is a detailed programme and the Director of Operations has been leading that. I also wanted just to draw the board's attention to our position around information governance, and the Chief Information Officer may want to supplement what I've said. But as the board will be aware, we knew we inherited a non-compliant position around information governance, and with outstanding enforcement notices which Manx Care inherited from the Department of Health and Social Care. During the course of last year, with the assistance of the Cabinet Office Transformation Programme, we did absolutely understand the scale of that non-compliance through the KPMG report, which we received as a board in the spring. That required us to put in both business as usual additional capacity into the information governance function, whilst also progressing a number of streams of development work, which would take around 18 months to 2 years. So we have started that piece of work. We have an information governance advisory board overseeing that, and we are moving towards the NHS Data Security and Protection Toolkit, the DSPT toolkit, which is used by the NHS in the UK, which will give us a standard framework from which to work. And we are working to achieve that DSPT compliance by June 2023. We have progressed with recruitment into the IG posts around the data protection impact assessments for primary care, around musculoskeletal and pharmacy, supporting the primary care at scale. The board will also be aware that we were imposed a penalty of £170,500 relating to a data breach that occurred in October 2021. We have issued a public apology, and I would like to take this opportunity again to apologise to the public on behalf of Manx Care for that data breach. We have submitted a detailed plan to the Information Commissioner which details how we will achieve secure email compliance and associated actions by the 31st of December. And the Information Commissioner has given early indication that they are very satisfied with that plan, and we will continue to meet regularly with them. Should we achieve all of the milestones in that plan, the penalty could not be imposed on us. I also wanted just to acknowledge the issues around community pharmacy provision in the north of the island, which occurred over June and July. This was as a result of our pharmacy provider, Lloyds, having severe staffing shortages, and I have described in the paper some of the regulatory issues surrounding that. So we do not have currently the level of contractual compliance and levers to assist us with managing incidents like that. The legislation is very much out of date, and so we've spoken with DHSC, and the Minister and Chief Executive are supporting us to move that legislation forward. It is their responsibility to do that. But I would like to absolutely pay tribute to Maria Bell and the Manx Care team of pharmacists who stepped in to run that service during that time of critical absence and the inability of Lloyds to be able to sustain that service in Ramsey. The St Paul's Square Pharmacy reopened on the 1st of August, and we continue to have regular meetings with Lloyds, putting in a strengthened contract whilst those regulatory changes come through. Also within my report, I just wanted to make the board aware of the Department of Health and Social Care's plan for 22-23. This isn't for Manx Care to approve, but it is for Manx Care to be aware of. We have contributed to that plan, and through the mandate review meetings and through the strategic commissioning group, we will continue to pick up the areas where we will jointly work. What I need to flag to the board at this stage is there are a number of expectations within that plan that currently do not have a funding stream. So that is an area where we will need to continue to have dialogue with the department about how those priorities in the department plan translate through to the mandate for Manx Care, and also a funding stream attached to those programmes of work. And finally, I just wanted to present the annual report for Manx Care for our first year. And the information in the annual report has been shared with the board in May, and was part of our annual public meeting in May. This will be submitted to the Department of Health and Social Care and to Tynwald, formally reporting on Manx Care's first year of operation. And I think it's fair to say Manx Care's first year of existence has been a year of discovery. We have uncovered many issues and deficits that have needed to be addressed in order to fully meet the ambitions of the Island Plan, where residents can have access to safe, comprehensive, high quality, fully integrated health and social care. As Manx Care commenced, our baseline work had identified our 3 priorities of improving quality and safety, improving the culture of the organisation, and improving the financial health of the organisation. And we've worked incredibly hard on those 3 priorities. However, I do think during the course of the year, the board has received information which indicates that the baseline was perhaps lower than what we had originally anticipated. In fact, Sir Jonathan Michael's midterm report noted that the challenges faced by Manx Care were far greater than he had anticipated in his report, and I think that's definitely been borne out by our experience. Our focus over the last 12 months has to absolutely make sure we have focused on safety and compliance and performance. And I think, you know, our papers, and certainly our papers today, evidence the progress we have made against quality and safety, culture, and our financial performance. We understand and we acknowledge the difficult financial context we have inherited. We know there's been a history of the Department of Health and Social Care struggling to deliver within its budget, and certainly Manx Care had to go back for supplementary votes in year 1. However, we remain committed as ever to work and improve on quality and safety, culture, and financial balance, and ensure we have the right basis from which we can further improve. So I think the annual report charts that level of progress that we have achieved against the backdrop of a very challenging baseline, and a baseline where we have had to do quite a lot of work to truly establish the accuracy of that baseline and develop plans from which we can then improve. So again, the annual report is for approval here today, Chair. Thank you, and happy to take any questions on my report.
Thanks, and I do think that this is a really excellent report, both in terms of the content, which is very honest, it has the good and the not so good, but also the presentation, which features so many of the people that work in Manx Care, because of course that's really what this is all about. It's services provided to people by people, and I think particularly if you have time to look through the month-by-month reports, it just shows some of the many things and developments that happen, so I commend that. Any questions? Andy?
Teresa, could I turn back to the pharmacy issue? to. So you say about legislation and DHSC helping, and then your closing comment was regulatory changes. So regulation and legislation are two things, aren't they? So do you mean to say that within the existing legislation there is some power for regulation which lies with Comin or is delegated to the Health Minister, which means that they might be able to effectively prevent this from happening, or are you saying that the legislation simply will not allow us to straighten that out jointly with the Minister and DHSC without new legislation?
So the current legislation is very outdated. It's been on the reform list for a number of years. It allows providers to go onto the approved list, but it actually doesn't give any assurance on delivery. So in the way you and I would know a standard contract and specification around hours of delivery, maintaining service, business continuity, oversight over business models, none of that is
specified.
Which actually meant when Lloyd's had those very difficult staffing crisis, they could close literally within hours and notify Manx Care and DHSC of that decision that they could no longer sustain services. So the legislation around pharmacy needs to be reformed and move forward, but equally, now this has been transferred across to Manx Care, we need to have stronger contractual arrangements in place, which gives us the opportunity to hold those providers to account in a contractual way, and for us to have oversight over a business continuity plan. You know, in this scenario, Manx Care didn't have to step in to provide services, but in order to protect services for the north of the island, we took that decision. So we moved our pharmacy teams off what they were doing, supporting practices, doing some of the cost improvement works, doing some of the more medicines management, technical work, in order to run pharmacy services. But we absolutely acknowledge there was a significant disruption, both for Ramsay Group practice and also for the population of the north of the island. We know there was queues. And what we want to avoid is that ever happening again. But that means us working differently with all pharmacy providers. The regulations and the legislation sat behind it does have to change. But also, you know, we need to work more in partnership with our pharmacy providers. It's another area where there are huge workforce shortages, both here and in the UK. So we need to build a little bit more resilience around our community pharmacy services. But the legislation is a really critical part of that, as is legislation on a number of fronts, as you know.
So what do you think, do we have any idea of the timetable for that? Because obviously the legislative programme looks pretty full for probably for the whole of the next parliamentary session.
We don't have an exact date, but we have a commitment to bring it much forward and try and find an emergency slot for that somewhere in that timetable. So the whole timetable will need to be reviewed. But we've absolutely had the commitment from the Department of Health and Social Care. It's a massive priority for them too.
As long as the exposure doesn't last too long, that's the main thing, right?
Of course, yes.
Okay, thanks.
Anybody else? Kate.
Thank you, Chair. So, Teresa, you just talked about shortfall in the provision of pharmacists, but also dotted throughout the papers in this pack today are various references to staffing issues and lack thereof and difficulty in hiring and so on. With that in mind, could you please comment on the cost of living crisis on the island and whether we are doing anything to assist staff in that matter, because obviously that's going to put an additional strain on our staff?
Yes, we absolutely do recognise that we are in a cost of living crisis, and there isn't anything formally in place at the moment, but we are in discussions with wider government about measures that could be put in place. I attended an extended Chief Officers group at the start of the week, and this was very much high on the agenda to basically understand the position across all government departments and arm's length organisations and consider what can be put in place. They are looking at some signposting. I think you will have heard the Chief Minister talking over the last couple of days about emergency packages, and that needs to be constantly kept under close review, because there is an acceptance that more support is going to be needed for staff during the next few months and potentially longer. We have also got the government conference and the economic strategy event, which is taking place in mid-September. And again, I think that is the opportunity. So whilst at this moment in time, we have no clear messages identified, it's something we absolutely are committed to look at very, very quickly in the next few weeks, both with government plus our own partnership forums, and think about what measures we can put in place. So I'm happy to provide an update at the next board as to how we've got on with that piece of work, but please be assured we have got it on our agenda. Thank you.
Sally wants to go in.
Yeah, just to add to that, there is a group that's just been set up in the last few days to look at the rising costs, particularly around fuel, for all people, but we've been invited to give the view for, you know, more vulnerable people in society, and we are seeing that people are returning pieces of equipment that they have to support their health because they can't afford the electric to run them. So it is been picked up as an urgent piece of work.
Okay, thank you.
Right, okay, shall we move on then now? Okay, so we're going to come to the committee chairs' reports. So first of all, Andy, on audit.
I think my short report here actually says all I need to say. I don't think I need to add anything to it.
Okay, well, you don't have to. Absolutely, welcome. It's there in writing. Katie, on the digital report.
Yeah, I do want to make a couple of remarks about this. The first thing is that I was delighted to see some audit reports now for clinical coding. Clinical coding has been in place for a while, but I've been asking to see the quality of the data that's being put in. We've got the first report now. It's going to take us a while to start to analyse that data, but it's great that that is now happening so I can understand what risks there are in that data, and Richard and I can work on improving that. So that was great to see. It was also great to see that there's good, strong cross-functional engagement at the Manx Care Record Advisory Board. Something I was concerned about, that there wasn't enough breadth of input into that, and I'm assured now by the minutes of that board that there are. The CEO mentioned in her opening remarks about information governance. That was something we discussed quite a lot, and there is in fact some now additional funding for additional resource, which is very good, which should help. Secure email should be implemented this week, I believe, Richard, so we'll be talking about that, won't we, at the next meeting to see if that's been done. So that was something that was of concern. And one anxiety I have, and that is over the visibility of shared services performance. So in IT specifically, we don't have direct control over what's going on in the IT sports space, and I've been asking for better visibility of that. I still don't have it, although I'm sure that there's going to be a dashboard, a web-enabled dashboard, which will allow us to see how the IT performance is affecting our patients. And so we're hoping to see by the next time we have a meeting, which will be in a couple of weeks, that we'll start to see some visibility on how the IT services are affecting our patients effectively. So that's an anxiety I have that I just want to bring to the board's attention.
Thanks, Katie. Okay. Now, the next two reports, just in terms of better flow for the meeting, we're going to put with the relevant agenda items. So the quality and safety report is going to go with the quality dashboard, and the finance report is going to go with the finance section. So we'll just come back to those shortly, but can we do the people committee chairs report?
Yes, of course. So building on Katie's point, clearly there are a number of staffing issues that will be mentioned in different reports as we go through. So whilst that is something that is often discussed at the people committee, we're not going to go into details about that in this paper, or in this update on this paper, I should say. We took the report on racism in the BMA and for those of you who have had the opportunity to read it, it's a very difficult read and very disturbing read. We had a robust discussion about what we could do within Manx Care, and really a focus on the workforce race equality standard we believe would be really helpful for Manx Care. We also recognise that diversity is very much an issue about inclusion and a feeling of belonging. And so the work around workforce and culture that's being done is really important in this area. I think it's also about how all of us learn about what that feels like to feel included, and how we can ensure that we are working hard as a board to ensure inclusion. We also looked at the broader BMA survey results, and an action plan has been developed, and that, along with the work on the workforce race equality standard, will come to the board in September. We had some good news in terms of staff suggestion scheme being brought about, and also 37 colleagues, and I do believe that may have increased, have come forward to become change champions. We've been asked to respond to a number of consultations, and Anne is doing that on our behalf. I'm happy to take any questions.
Good. As you say, we will be coming back in the agenda to various parts of that.
Indeed.
But any questions for now? No? Okay. So, on to our first of our three main priorities, the patient safety one. So, Oliver, do you want to pick up the integrated performance report?
Yeah, sure. So, since our establishment as Manx Care, we've produced a monthly IPR, Integrated Performance Report, to ensure transparency regarding the organisation's achievements against key areas of mandated and operational key performance indicators across all service areas. The IPR is used both internally within Manx Care to support the monitoring and management of operational and clinical performance. We're still in the early stages of developing bespoke reports for care groups to use to drive improvements in performance, although I'm glad to say that between the business intelligence team and our newly created performance and improvement team, these developments are well underway. An area where Manx Care has had limited success since its establishment is our ability to offer outpatient appointments within 6 weeks to those people who have been referred to us by their GP urgently. So this compliance against the standard in April 2021 was 56.9%, and this has only increased to 57.3% to date. Our ability to improve this further has been hampered by a number of reasons. Like the UK, an increase in referrals for suspected cancer has been observed on the Isle of Man since the end of the pandemic, which all have to be accommodated within 2 weeks, which mean that we need to prioritise outpatient appointments to accommodate those people who have been referred to us with suspected cancer. Clinic capacity has also been reduced in certain specialties, as we have made the decision not to cover doctors' leave with agency locums, as has often been the case in the past, in order for us to reduce our expenditure on agency. The performance team is currently focused on outpatient services and access, an access policy which is a document which is commonplace in all NHS trusts, but something that we didn't have at the beginning of Manx Care, is in the process of being implemented, which improves our management of outpatient clinics, including the introduction of partial booking, where patients ring in to agree the date and time of their appointment instead of being issued an appointment, and the introduction of patient-initiated follow-up, where patients decide if they need to see the consultant again, rather than being routinely issued a follow-up appointment every 6 months. In addition, several specialties will receive additional funding through the Recovery and Restoration Programme to undertake additional clinics. These clinics are already underway in neurology, and weekend clinics will start in cardiology on the 13th of September. In terms of areas of significant improvement since the start of Manx Care, we are pleased to report that a reduction of 576 people awaiting allocation to an NHS dentist, which is 24% reduction of the waiting list inherited by Manx Care from the DHSC. This improvement has been achieved thanks to changes to NHS dental contract management arrangements, and the plan to have the waiting list cleared by the end of this financial year is still achievable and on track. A second area of achievement has been a significant reduction in the length of stay in Martin Ward here in Ramsey, from 52 days to 42 days, which is a reduction of 13 days. Although Ramsey is a rehabilitation ward which traditionally has a long length of stay, an increase in therapist staffing, plus the introduction of a new hybrid healthcare assistant and rehab assistant role, has ensured patients receive more rehabilitative input throughout the week. In addition, an increase in consultant input on the ward, with a consultant presence on the ward every day working alongside the existing multidisciplinary team of nursing staff, therapists and social workers, will help in senior decision making around discharge. As the Executive Director responsible for delivery of operational health services, I'm mindful of the challenging position that was inherited by Manx Care from the DHSC on the 1st of April. Despite the achievements of the last 18 months, particularly in the areas I will shortly be outlining in the recovery and restoration paper and those I've just mentioned, I realise that the full impact of Manx Care hasn't yet been felt by most of the population. However, I'm confident that the developments that we are putting in place behind the scenes to resolve a lot of the long-standing issues within our health service, such as administrative process, lengthy waiting lists, etc., are starting to be addressed thanks to the solid foundation of operational and clinical governance that we are putting in place.
Thanks, Oliver, and thanks for highlighting some of the challenges and the achievements. I think the reductions in waiting lists in the current climate is a very significant achievement. But can I ask you my favourite question? This is the June performance report and we're in September. When are we going to get to the point where we can have the performance report from the month previous rather than 2 months previous?
So between Rich's team within business intelligence and our new performance team, which has only been in operation for a month or so, they're working on automating all of those reports. So making sure that actually the report that is a report can be produced automatically by the system on the 1st of each month. At the moment, we've got 2 care groups with that report designed. That's medicine and urgent care, and surgery, anaesthetics and critical care. So there's still a bit of work to do to automate the others, but the most complicated ones have been done. So what we're going to be doing once the reports are now produced and all of the data quality standards have been produced, so that we know that the reports that the system are producing are accurate. The care groups will be, on the 1st of the month, the care groups will be provided with that information and given us a 7-day period to write their narrative and any of the improvements that they need to make. And then that should give us time to put that report through the committee cycle in order to come to this meeting. So although it's doubtful that we would be able to, in the September meeting, we probably wouldn't be able to report on, well, not the 1st of September, so reporting on August is probably a bit ambitious, but certainly reporting on July will be achieved hopefully by the next public board.
Right. Can we just note that for the minutes, Elaine, for the next public board, which is the November one?
But what we're looking to do is actually to reduce down the number of metrics provided by the IPR. So rather than care groups having to write on probably around 70 or 80 in total, we were going to slim it down to around 20. And we'll also work with Sally's area, because obviously it's a joint IPR. So we'll work with Sally's area to come up with that slimmed down set of metrics that we're going to be reporting on.
Okay, I will come to Sally in a moment, but Richard, do you want to come in on this point?
Just to clarify the timeline.
Yes.
So, as we've spoken about a lot in the past, there's a lot of manual work to collate the data. And so the data is prepared for the June reporting at the end of the first week of July. And as Oliver's suggested, it then takes 3 or 4 weeks for that narrative to be added so that they're ready for the August committees.
Yeah, but that's not changing the offer that Oliver has just made, that by the time we get to the November meeting, we'll be getting the September report.
So that's what Oliver's referring to there is the automated dashboard, so that the manual
Yeah.
work goes away.
Yeah.
That's now getting to the point we can use the automated
Okay.
one instead of the manual
Okay.
one at the next meeting.
Well, whilst the workings are interested, it's the outcome that I'm keen to see. Okay, thank you. Sally, did you want to highlight anything?
Yeah, within children's and family social work, we've not had data for about 4 months now, so you'll see that within the work in the pack. And that's because coding went awry, which I can't articulate that technicality, but what the BI team have done is that they are working on the automated dashboard. We've been collating some things manually, and I've been told that our live dashboard should be ready in about 7 to 8 weeks, which will be the end of October, so I think what Oliver said is right. In children and families, though, what we do know, which is a concern for me, that we saw initial child protection conferences not been held on time during the pandemic, and we were just starting to actually come up in that performance. But June, we actually did not meet any of the timescales. No child protection conference was held within the agreed timescale, and that was mainly down to TT, which is a bit of a concern due to road closures and also the availability of police and education. So that's something that we really need to plan around next year, because that's just not acceptable. A good news story, though, is that, you know, the amount of children contributing to their review, again, when we started, that was really quite low, as low as 43%. We were just getting it back up to 63%. In June, that was 90%, and actually it was only one child who didn't contribute to the review, so that's really good. Adult social work, I mean, the KPIs have not been developed. They are starting to be developed with the automated dashboard, and we've got the newly appointed Assistant Director of Social Work, who obviously that's a priority. The KPIs that we did have did not answer the so what question, so we're looking at that. Social care operational services, I'm pleased to say we're actually seeing the start of the recovery from the pandemic. We've had several spikes in COVID outbreaks over the last few months, especially around TT again, and that's put incredible strain on direct service provision. But I would like to thank all the colleagues working within our care homes and community homes for keeping the show on the road and doing so to a good standard. We've had Cqc inspections undertaken in most of the areas around older peoples and learning disability, and any escalations and recommendations have not been around the quality of care. They've tended to be around environmental issues and building maintenance. So I think that really supports, you know, our staff are doing a damn good job.
Great, thank you. Any questions for either Oliver or Sally? Katie.
Thank you. Oliver, I see that we're still having a bit of a bumpy time around theatre sessions and theatre utilisation, and the biggest single reason why we're cancelling operations is lack of anaesthetists, although it's not, you know, it's not the only reason, but it's the biggest single reason. I thought we'd sort of put that behind us a bit. I thought we were up to scratch on anaesthetists now. I know there was obviously a lot of problems in the past, but I thought we'd sort of got ourselves to an even keel. Can you just comment?
No, we still have a number of vacancies within anaesthetics in terms of substantive appointments. The bumpiness that you're seeing is Synaptic doing their work, and because Synaptic, who are our recovery and restoration partners, they're not here all the time. They come in blocks.
Okay.
So there'll be a period of, say, 10 days where we do a block of cataracts. So that is a 10-day period where those theatres are utilised, and similarly within orthopaedics, Synaptic aren't here all the time. There are weeks that they're here and then weeks that they're not here. So that is the kind of up and downness that you're seeing, because when they are here, they are operating at 100% utilisation. We still have gaps within anaesthetics. There are within our anaesthetic template, there are 160 PAs, which is chunks of time that we need to cover. That's based on the current the pre-pandemic theatre schedule, which is 5 theatres running, plus all of the emergency work. But of the 160 PAs, 110 of those are dedicated to just emergency work, and they're always the priority.
For people who are not familiar, a PA is...
The PA is a 4-hour chunk of time for consultants to work.
Yeah.
But of those, of the 160 PAs that we need to cover, 110 of those are related to emergency cover. So we need to cover those 110 first before we cover any of the rest. And so, and because particularly, you know, we've had locums come arrive and then leave because they've only been able to commit for a small amount of time, not permanently. So that has meant that we've fluctuated a bit, and obviously there's leave and things. So because we are, in theory, if we are fully staffed, we have enough capacity to cover leave internally. But because we are understaffed, it means that quite often when there are holidays that we do have to cancel lists because there isn't enough slack in the system, and that is why it's so up and down at the moment. Once we are fully staffed, then we would see that kind of smooth utilisation return. But we are still quite a way away from that in terms of our recruitment challenges within that area.
Thank you. Okay.
Teresa wants to come in on that point.
Yeah, I just wanted to sort of address the question you raised around the anaesthetists. And, you know, whilst it was a very welcome outcome at the end of April for the case to be dismissed against the 4 anaesthetists, the reality is that the June performance report will reflect that none of those 4 anaesthetists were back fully working. So whilst the professional case against the anaesthetists was dismissed and there was no professional regulatory action against 3 from the GMC, psychologically they require an awful lot of support to return to full-time clinical practice. So whilst they are at work and we are supporting them, they are not working full duties. And I think that needs to be acknowledged, that we're still supporting those 4 colleagues to return to full-time practice. And certainly the June position coming sort of within 6 weeks of the dismissal hearing was reflective of them gradually returning back into clinical practice.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Andy.
I've actually got 3 questions already, sorry.
No problem. Fire away.
So my first one is to Oliver about the did not attend rates. So they seem to be creeping up, and in June they were up quite a bit. And in the commentary underneath it effectively states about people not showing up because of isolation and so on, fluctuation of that. Are we still suffering from that even at this particular time?
Yeah, so we still advise patients not to attend, come into any hospital building, if they've got COVID. So that is the same. At the time, we're still providing LFD so people could test. We've stopped that from the mid-August, but we're still asking people not to attend due to you know, if they have symptoms. Although we ask people to ring in if they are not going to come, that sometimes that doesn't happen.
So the corollary of that is then during TT you say that people didn't attend because of restricted access, and then earlier you'd said about some measures that you're taking to try and basically get people to attend.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that cyclical up, if you like, for June, particularly around TT, is going to be resolved by that, or will it just mean that effectively those appointments will be filled by people that definitely can get there because they're inside the course?
Yeah. So what I mentioned earlier about partial booking, I was worked within the NHS back in 2005 when they introduced it,
right, okay.
As a precursor to the e-referral system, and it halved DNA rates
Okay.
because people actually ring in and say, can I, I've received this letter, I would like to attend on such and such a date, rather than just receiving a letter.
Okay.
We know that there's a lot of issues as part of the work that we've done to introduce the access policy. We've found a lot of issues around the administrative processes within our appointments bureau, and that's no fault of the members of staff working with within appointments. We know that they're probably functioning at around half of the staff that they actually need to cope with the volume of appointments that are coming through. But so there's a lot of issues that we've identified. The main issue, and I know that this is a big issue for the public, is actually they send out appointments 12 months in advance, but those appointments often get cancelled because consultants are on leave. In the UK, appointments are issued a lot sooner, or closer to the time. But with the launch of the partial booking system, people will be able to ring in and make an appointment in around 6 weeks' time. And because they've committed to that appointment, it's much more likely that they'll actually attend. And that was what was found in the UK. We're going to be piloting partial booking within orthopaedics, because we've done so much work within orthopaedics to get their waiting list validated as part of the recovery and restoration project, so that they are the ones that we're going to launch. But we do need to, as part of the introduction of the access policy, we know that there's a huge amount of efficiencies that could be made. So rather than the Appointments Bureau having to cancel and rebook great swathes of appointments when consultants take leave, obviously if we're booking much further in, closer to the time of the appointment, that workload will be removed. But we need to bear in mind the additional workload of all these people ringing in to make their appointments. So it's a big piece of work that the performance team are working on at the moment.
And will say, for instance, in a couple of months' time then, or whenever it starts to bite, probably 3 to 4 months' time because of the appointment cycle, will that be reported back through FBC?
Yeah, so
that we can pick it back up? Yeah,
what I'll do is I'll ask our performance team to write a specific report on that and all of the other improvements that they're making through the introduction of the access policy.
Thank you.
Before you move on to your next question, somebody wants to comment on this point.
Yeah, just a couple of clarifications for the data utilization. Data utilization target is 80% at the bestest of centers, and it's not 100%. That's number one. Number two is, I think it's a reminder that data utilization, when we look at it, we only look for elective surgeries. We are not talking about urgent. So we do know the pandemic effect has been increasing number of emergency surgeries that have been happening. So that will have an impact on the elective capacity as well. So there is not just the workforce, there is the way how we calculate these things will change. And that might be the bumping in, depends on how we actually calculate it and see. So just so that, we are aware of those kind of nuances.
Thank you.
Okay, back to you, Andy.
Sorry, so the next question is, would you comment on the black breaches that happen in ambulance? Because we'd previously had a discussion that we didn't really suffer from handover problems, and yet here we are, 4 black breaches in the data for this month.
Yeah, so we've had within June we had quite a significant increase in both ambulance demand and also ED demand. One of the issues that we face within our ED is that the ED was designed in the late 90s and built in 2003 on the basis of around 18,000 attendances. We are seeing around 38 to 40,000 attendances a year through our ED at the moment. And so we often come into a situation where we are full, that every single room is full, and quite often with sick patients. So often we end up in a situation where there isn't a space to hand over an ambulance patient. Obviously we try our best, because we know that one ambulance waiting to hand over is a quarter of the ambulance capacity removed. So actually it's one of our priorities to stop that happening. The ED are putting into place, from an estate's point of view, we are about to do some redesigns within ED to develop an ambulance handover bay, in the UK, because most of the UK suffer with a similar problem, but most EDs within the UK have built what they call a rapid assessment and treatment unit, RATU, that actually is staffed by a nurse and a relatively senior doctor to take those handovers from ambulances. Fortunately, we're not in anywhere near the similar situation where essentially the patients are in that unit for hours. You know, the idea is that they're there for maybe 15 minutes, get triaged and then moved on, whereas in the UK there's so much demand that, you know, they are the front of the queue, and then there's probably 20 or 30 ambulances after that. But fortunately, we're not in that situation, but we realise that actually we do need to create a dedicated area for that, so that we don't get those massive handover. And, you know, sometimes our ED attendances is very fluctuates. So, for example, on Tuesday of this week, we had about 120 attendances, whereas the next day it was 68. So we do see huge fluctuations in ambulance or just general attendance, which is difficult to plan for when there's such big fluctuations. But, you know, we realise that we are constrained by estates, and we do need to just have to make the best of what we've got, pending any larger investments associated with the urgent care transformation project.
Okay, thank
Just before your third question, Andy, Theresa wants to come in on this one.
Absolutely.
And I just want to just provide assurance to the board that obviously the patient's safety in those situations where we have a full ED and ambulances queuing to offload patients is a priority, and we recognise we are physically constrained with the size of our ED. Last year we put in place what's called a full capacity protocol linked to our OPAL framework. So that describes the actions we take as an organisation when we are faced with a full emergency department, which sets up a series of events through the hospital in order to release that pressure. So for assurances, we do have what's described as a full capacity protocol, which is governed around ensuring the safety of the patients and achieving a flow through the hospital at the earliest opportunity to mitigate against a full ED and ambulances queuing to offload.
Thanks very much.
Last question?
The final one is, so you were talking about the changes to the IPR and providing less in the way of KPIs visible at this particular point. But the other aspect of this is the new template and framework for the IPR, which has to go to the DHSC, which was in the papers. Can you assure us that those will also be automatically filled and there's no mismatch between what we already do and what we're going to send to them? Because the last thing we want is more work simply, you know, thrown into people's laps.
Yeah, so
small mismatches.
I've been really clear, and I think Theresa has as well, with discussions with the DHSC, is that the reporting and the assurance framework shouldn't become an industry in its own right. That we've had the development of the single oversight framework, which we initially were hoping that would be, it started off quite collaborative. It's taken a slightly different turn in that we are being kind of forced to report on the monthly basis, and with very little flexibility on what is the content of it, which is unfortunate, because we started off in the kind of joint understanding that it would be a kind of an extract from what we already report, rather than having to have people dedicated on pulling all of that data and manipulating it. I think we are starting to make traction on that again, so that we have the single oversight framework that meets our what we're reporting within the IPR, and then also what we're reporting through the mandate assurance process. Okay. So I think we went slightly off track, but I think we're now kind of coming back to a joint understanding that actually it's not in our interest, and it's not in the DHSC's interest to have people within Rich's team just dedicated to recasting data based on really small kind of changes in the way that they want it reporting. And so I think we are we are and we've actually started to this month, actually in August, we sent the first batch of data relating to the single oversight framework over to the DHSC. They received it and they were appreciative of it, and actually I think we've managed to automate it using the vast majority of the work that Rich's team has done around the automation. So, and it, you know, with all automation type projects, it's an investment at the start to make sure that all of that automation is accurate and documented, so that in future those automated reports can be run, you know, relatively simply, or even on even it's kind of generated automatically and sent over. So I think we're making progress, but it has been a bit of an uphill struggle with that.
I think I mean, to me, looking into the relationship between the two bodies, it seems as if that what originally started as light touch, report by exception, seems to be changed. You know, seems to be much more of a regimented oversight, and that is okay within limits. But I don't want it to become too burdensome. So I think, you know, as long as we're aware of it, and if it changes, I think we need to make sure that the board is aware all the way through. I'm sure you would make us aware anyway.
Okay. Well, those are very important points, and thank you for those questions. But I think we need to. Oh, sorry, Tim.
Just a quick comment. Obviously, from the data, it was clear that children and families data was missing. So I'm reassured that that's acknowledged, and that there's plans in place to pick that up and to make sure that information comes in a timely way to this board. And also, just looking at some of that data, it's inevitably often about process, and I think it's good perhaps in the future that we can explore getting some data around outcomes, and because these are often proxy in terms of what the quality looks like and what the outcomes look like. So I welcome and look forward to doing some work with the director and having that discussion in due course.
Thank you, Tim. Right, so as I said before, accompanying the quality dashboard item on the agenda, we're going to first take the report from Sarah on the Quality and Safety Committee.
Thank you, Chair. I suppose I want to start by saying that we are having very challenging discussions because the issues are very challenging that we're bringing to the table at Quality, Safety and Engagement. I think that yesterday I had the great privilege of spending the morning in our obstetrics and midwifery with our obstetrics and midwifery teams, and I was incredibly assured and actually very moved by the dedication and the commitment that our staff have to deliver a safe service and do a good job. But I was also very frustrated and quite angry about their inability to do that on occasion because of lack of staff. And so it's very real. We have a very real, and it was brought home to me, and Paul has talked about this in Quality, Safety and Engagement, but I had that experience myself yesterday of learning that our head of midwifery keeps her uniform in the office in case she needs to put it on because someone has not turned up for a shift. So that is the reality of the situation, and it really was very stark to me yesterday. So we have real issues about staffing, and our challenge as a board will be to have a discussion about how we balance the books and how we deliver against demand and safety requirements. That is not going to be an easy discussion, but I think I'm also very assured that we have very good and respectful discussions around this board table, and I know that those discussions are always held with the patient at the forefront of our mind. We have some challenges around engagement with the review that was given by the ENT, into the ENT service, I should say, and I'm afraid I can't assure the board that that is progressing in the way that we would expect. But we will be looking at that in a lot more detail at the next Quality, Safety and Engagement meeting, and we must ensure that there is greater engagement and ownership on that topic. The Ockenden report, I don't think anybody could have missed the news across in the UK this week with a number of maternity services saying we are really struggling We have real issues here, and I've already talked about my experience yesterday. We had a special meeting of Quality, Safety and Engagement to go through that report. We cannot give assurance that we are compliant with all of the recommendations, but what we are committed to doing is developing a maternity strategy, and I'm delighted, and it was in Teresa's report, that we are being supported in doing that by the Royal College of Midwifery, who are coming across next week. So there is much to do on some very difficult issues, and I think we understood that Manx Care was inheriting issues on staffing, on the ability to provide enough staff, but I keep saying to colleagues, and I don't know if this is helpful to share in public, but it's almost like we thought the issue was like this, and actually it's like this, and we've gone deeper and deeper and deeper, and there are more and more things to be resolved. So we remain committed to doing that, but we will have to have some very difficult discussions. We review the operational care quality group minutes, and there were some issues there that the Director of Nursing raised about vital signs, and there is some more work to be done around that, and I know, Paul, you're focusing on that within those areas. For assurance, I can say that we are delighted that we still receive patient stories within Quality, Safety Engagement and have the opportunity to reflect on those that are also brought to the board. Paul is going to talk about the quality dashboard. That is progressing very well, the quality of data, the depth of information. We're really pleased to see that. We took a report from the theatre improvement plan, and I would like the board to note that that is progressing. We weren't able to have a detailed discussion about it due to staff absence, but we will be doing that at the next meeting. And if there are issues for escalation that come out of that, I will bring them to the next meeting. The last thing I wanted to say is myself, along with a couple of other non-executive colleagues, had the great pleasure yesterday afternoon to meet with our MCALS service, and a bunch of very, very passionate women who are working very hard to ensure, we described it in the end as a sort of triage service. So really helping people with everything from a patient losing a very important bit of personal, I don't want to say what it was. I was going to say equipment. They lost their dentures. I don't think I'm giving any betraying confidences, but you know, people lose things between ward transfers, and really helping that person be confident that that would be resolved, right through to people ringing and saying, I've just moved to the island, I don't know how to register for a GP or a dentist, can you help me? And we were, the board will recall that we took, that business case was presented to us, we approved it, that's working, and 87% of people who ring have their issue resolved within 24 hours. And that's amazing. Our challenge to the team was tell us how that's saving time in other areas, because it must be saving the time that would have taken in GPs where someone's ringing to go, do I register with you? Do I register with you? And actually they're managing to resolve the macro and the minor issues, which are very important to people. So that is a very good news piece of information to share with the board to end on, but against some very, very challenging issues that we are facing.
Okay, well, I think you've teed up the next two items very nicely there. So, Paul, do you want to take the quality dashboard first?
Thank you, Chairman. I'm Paul Moore. I'm the Director of Nursing, for those who don't know who I am. As a board, we're unashamedly pursuing a goal of high quality, high reliability care. And to be able to do that, it's important that we have the ability to understand through insight and foresight what the quality and the standard of care looks like. And when we started out in Manx Care, actually that was a bit of a gap. I wasn't really sure what we knew as a board. So one of the first things that I wanted to build was a dashboard that gave each and every one of us, but also our staff working on the front lines, some insight into the standard of their care, using a combination of leading and lagging and predictive indicators. And in the fullness of time, as you gather data sets and build information, you then start to use that to predict and to gain foresight, and then to start to make changes to some tactical changes to get better value out of the care that you provide for the amount of money that you have. So to do that, we've needed to build this dashboard, and I'm really proud of it, but I think it's still at the embryonic stage in many ways. What you have before you is a comprehensive set of indicators that are organised around the CQC's key line of inquiries. So that's safe, effective, responsive, well-led, etc. And I think, you know, I did prepare a long list, but in the interest of time, I won't go through them. But suffice to say that the indicators that are demonstrating Manx care is good, is better and improving, outnumber by a factor of 2 to 1 the indicators that are stuck. And I think that demonstrates that we do have the ability to affect change. We do have the ability to leverage improvement, and you can see that in a range of these indicators, which I'm happy to take questions on. It also shows that we're not perfect and we are challenged, and in spite of our issues with staffing, which manifestly have a big impact on quality, we are able to make some progress in the areas that matter by prioritising and giving people time and working through cycles of improvement work with them. It's that kind of thing that delivers the results in MCALs. It's that kind of thing that's delivered the improvements on blood clot management, on contamination of blood culture samples, for example, things that we might see as trivial, but they're hugely important to patient safety. So I think if it's okay, Chairman, I might pause and take questions and use the time we have to field any questions that colleagues might have about where we stand on this.
Sure, I have a question. I mean, I think this is excellent, an excellent development, and as you yourself has pointed out, it's still work in progress in many ways. But I guess when you've got a dashboard like this with dozens and dozens of indicators, the questions, well, there are two questions really, is how do you alert to the most serious issues? And secondly, how do you escalate them? And do you have a system for both of those two answers?
Yes, yes, we do. I mean, what we've applied to this dashboard, whether it's right for us in the long run, is perhaps a question we should think about as a board. But what I've applied to this dashboard is the best in class. So what we know works elsewhere and adds value to organisations on an improvement journey where quality is challenged. So we've applied that thinking to our work at Manx Care as far as I am able to do so. Yes, I have to say that it hasn't been an easy year because some of the data didn't exist, some of the data capture didn't exist, and the systems were unreliable, and therefore the quality of the data is questionable. So where I've been able to, I have been able to do it, and we've done it. And by and large, you can see we've got most things covered off. In terms of escalations, yeah, we attempt to benchmark as many of these as we can with similar organisations. Where we can't benchmark, we set thresholds of tolerance that we agree locally inside the organisation, and those are used to determine what's acceptable. And anything outside of tolerance will get flagged, and I flagged that to the operational clinical quality group in the first instance, and that's my opportunity to hold colleagues to account and drive improvement. And thereafter I report openly, honestly and transparently, as I'm sure Sarah will vouch, to the Quality and Safety Executive Committee, because I think it's important people understand what's good and what isn't good, and more importantly what we're doing about it. At some point, when you're overwhelmed by the scale of the quality challenges, I think it goes without saying that you will have to prioritise. We will have to prioritise. It's not possible for us to do everything all at once in one go, and I'm the first to recognise that, which is why I think we've been taking time to build baselines in this first year so that we can, as a board, we can agree what our quality priorities are going forward. I don't think we've reached that point yet where we've determined those priorities. I think to some extent it will depend on the intelligence we get from this and also the intelligence we glean from the Cqc inspections. And then we can take a considered view around what's the best value indicators to tackle and in what order. And you know, I imagine that will prompt an interesting discussion and debate, but that will allow us then to focus in.
I think you've really got the building bricks here, and I mean, I would suggest that you would escalate serious harm, so you'd escalate things that are happening recurrently, but I'll leave it to you to determine the approach. And any other questions on this one? Yes, Andy?
Just one small one. It'll just come back to the point I made before. I mean, I agree that there's an awful lot of hard work here. It's really good. It's really useful to be able to see all of these things. The one thing I know I've mentioned before is the ones which say, like complaints, 450 per annum, recording them as 33 as an average over the year isn't that helpful, because you then literally have to try and work out how many we've actually had in the year. But I know that's a minor point.
Yeah.
But to stick with complaints, just as an example, so you do all the things I would absolutely hope. So how many you've got, how many have been answered, acknowledged, and how many have been answered within the timescales and so on. And pretty clearly, you could easily see an escalation for that, because we're in whichever forum that might be, because there's not a single green or amber block along the responses answered in time.
Yeah.
So we're not fulfilling that function to our patients, to the service users in effect. And we're consistent on doing that, despite the fact that's one of the things that we know that we are charged with doing.
Yeah.
And it's hard to know. So where would you think? What would we do? Should we be maybe pushing that through QSE, or do we deal with that internally first and then push the QSE if we can't resolve it?
First and foremost, I think we deal with that on the front line, as close to the patient interface as possible.
Course.
But I think you make a really good point, which touches on the point the chairman was making about what we're able to measure. And in terms of complaints, I can measure how good we are at acknowledging that we've received a concern. And I can measure how fast we are at responding to that concern. To some extent, that's helpful but insufficient for our needs as a board. What we really need to understand is what are the strategic implications of the patient experience or the service user experience, and what does that mean for our strategy going forward. That I can't extract as in a way that is helpful at the moment, but that is much more valuable to us than I think tracking how fast or how slow we are.
Yeah.
So it's limited by what I can measure. It's not really what I want to measure yet, but we'll work in that direction. And your point about is this the right statistic is absolutely valid, and I think it's a conversation we should keep having, because it needs to be meaningful and helpful and valuable to the board, and I think if it's not, I need to make it as best as I can be.
And I think the other thing is we've got the changes to the complaint regulations on the horizon, legislation, which means that IRB will probably be reformed in one form or another.
Yeah.
It will go across all aspects of care rather than just NHS.
Indeed.
Health. So obviously we need to make sure that we've anticipated what we've already got on our hands, in terms of we shouldn't have surprises when we get to that point. That's just an example.
Do you think it might be okay if I just add as well, because this kind of, it links a number of things that have been said already today. I'm not at all surprised by our complaints performance. I'm not happy about it by any means, but I'm not at all surprised. 2 members of our complaints team who would ordinarily process this and keep it going, they've put their uniforms on and they've gone into clinical practice because that's where the priority is. There have been days when I put my uniform on and gone into clinical practice because that's where the priority is. And
very
sometimes things like this are the aspects of our quality programme that suffer, but that's prioritising patient safety above other concerns, and I think it's right and proper that we do that. But that will explain some of the problems that we're seeing.
And I think you've provided an excellent segue into the next agenda item. Do you want to... sorry, I beg your pardon, there's another question on this one, yeah?
I'm sorry. I was just going to say, as a new member of the board, it was a really helpful dashboard to have and to illustrate what was happening. I did just want to pick up on the well-led section, and in particular the amount of safeguarding training which was read. And I'm sure there'll be a plan in place to address that, but that clearly is a really important area for the organisation.
Obviously one for Sally rather than Paul.
Yeah, we've recognised that, and if you look at the annual report of the Isle of Man Safeguarding Board, spend on safeguarding training, certainly in adults, was 0. We have put it in the required outcomes framework this year that we will commit to ensuring that every member of staff is trained to the appropriate level, and we have level 3 training that's secured and that's happening over a week in October, which I think all exec directors have been invited to as well. So that training is been looked at and will progress, and we have put it in our required outcome framework.
That sounds great, and I'm sure all exec members will attend that, which will be wonderful.
We will.
Thank you.
Okay, so I think this is a really excellent paper on nursing workforce. Paul, do you want to?
Trevor, just before I go into nursing workforce, can I just say one last thing about the dashboard, which is about where I would like to take it on its journey next. So we've got 13 months of data on the whole for most of those indicators, and for most of those indicators, data's current up to 1 month in arrears, which I think is good. That means we're getting very close to the point where we'll be able to use statistical process control for improvement, and that will help us understand as a board what is normal, and more importantly, what's abnormal variation. And then, really helpfully, I think will help us to determine as a board what stands a realistic prospect of becoming compliant if we do X, Y, and Z. Because I think that will convey that there's an opportunity to make things different and make a change for the benefit of patients. So that's my next plan with this dashboard for it. Now, in terms of the nursing workforce paper, I don't intend to go through every paragraph. I've been very careful to set my stall out for the board in an open and transparent way. I recognise this is an extremely difficult issue. I also recognise it's not just a nursing issue too. I think all the directors around this table have a version of this. But it summarises a raft of activities that have been in play during the last 12 months. To understand and better manage the nursing workforce challenge. I think within a few days of my arrival, it became apparent to me that colleagues were saying we're short of staff, but we lack the intelligence to be able to demonstrate that. And as I started looking, I found myself being more like a miner because I was digging and digging and digging, and I had not reached the floor. Just getting answers to simple questions like how many vacancies do we have took me 6 months. And, clarifying that we've got workforce models in place in the clinical areas and that they're costed, and those costs are factored into the budgets, and that there's what they call an uplift was a phenomenally difficult thing to validate. And the acuity and dependency, which is a process we use to evaluate whether we have the right numbers of people given the kind of work they have to do, hasn't been updated for a very long time, as far as I understand it. And so we were working with information that was well out of date, not very clear and hard to find. And it's almost like flying a plane without the instruments. So it's against that backdrop that I brought into play a number of things this year, which I would consider to be very basic workforce tools, just to give us that foundation upon which we can then make some strategic choices. So without question, I think it goes without saying that staffing represents our biggest threat to the achievement of Manx Care's purpose and objectives and our goals. But I would also say that without question, if managed and overcome, it represents our biggest opportunity to improve the standard of care and become a resilient organisation, which helps us with the quality of care, but helps us financially. I think a lot of our financial challenges are driven by an unsustainable situation with our workforce, where we're over reliant on what I call in my report countermeasures, which are incredibly expensive and unsustainable. So I do think it represents our biggest threat and opportunity. And we've also been making a concerted effort to be proactive. I find it difficult as a director to be constantly reactive. I like to stand in the future. I like to anticipate what's coming. And to do that, I like to be able to see. So we've built within this paper, you will see reference to risk scenarios, which is my kind of rudimentary attempt to understand what's coming down the pipeline. If I were able to manipulate some variables like vacancy, or the numbers of recruits, or the amount of domestic production we can produce. And I think all things taken into consideration, recognising the huge effort that's going into managing staffing, we're operating in what we call the likely optimistic scenario, which by the end of this financial year, if our international recruitment delivers in the way that we think it might do, we're going to be in a much better place. But between now and then, it's extremely challenging and very difficult, which I'm acknowledging in my to continue supporting international recruitment, I do believe this is essential in order to provide a service that is already curtailed by 20% given our vacancy factor. You will note that I've been a little bit optimistic in my scenario modelling on retirements, and I think that could swing in either direction. I'm kind of hoping on the basis that those numbers will play out in the way that we think, that will continue to operate in the likely optimistic scenario. But if the numbers of people eligible for retirement activated their retirement plans in the numbers that could really destabilise our finances and our staffing significantly. I use the quality dashboard as a balancing measure because although it's not easy to isolate harms and defects in care and attribute them to staffing, you can spot certain things if you look closely enough. Sarah mentioned a moment ago about recognising the signs of clinical deterioration is one of those. That requires people to be able to take vital sign measurements from patients at a set time and at a set frequency. If your staffing is severely constrained, you will find that that drops off. The gaps between observations extends, and then the intervention by the relevant support teams afterwards is often compromised. Those are subtle signs of staffing. Another one would be missed medicines or medicines that are not given on time, etc. So there are things that we can look at, and I do look at as balancing measures to make sure we're safe. The point I want to emphasise, because I think this underlines the importance of having really good demand management information. I have struggled to some extent, and I think colleagues have as well. It's quite difficult trying to build workforce models and plan for the future with some uncertainty around what's heading down our way. And I think it underlines the importance of getting to that as soon as we're able to as a board, so that we can plan our budgets, we can plan our operations, we can plan our staff, etc., to meet what we think is the demand coming down the pipeline. And then finally in the paper, well, two things I want to say. First of all is, I've given you an illustration of how, as Director of Nursing, I assure myself that staffing is safe. And this is where I have to be careful, because assurance for me is positive and negative, and both are of equal value. And you'll see from the table that I've shared with you in the chart that for July, actually we are running with staffing levels which are much lower than they ought to be for the activity that is done. However, what that doesn't do is it doesn't tell you how that's been improved as a consequence of the countermeasures that go in to play. And I've made reference to those as being high-cost agency, use of bank staff, the redeployment of colleagues, the temporary closure of a clinical service. And some of those decisions are done several times a day, in certain circumstances, hour by hour. But you will see from that table that there are some services that are particularly vulnerable. And I make reference there to some of our medical and surgical wards, the emergency department and maternity services as being particularly vulnerable to shortages of staff. I can't say that I, hand on heart, would say staffing is safe. What I can say is, when staffing is not safe, we take every single action we can to make it as safe as we possibly can. And we'll recognise that that has implications for our finances, but also in some cases, implications for our patients if we have to cancel. None of those things are acceptable to me, but we have to take the action which is the safest for the patient at the time. The last bit of my paper, I draw attention to the need to grow our own heroes and increase the domestic production of registered nurses on the island. I say that because whilst I think international recruitment is phenomenally helpful, I don't think it's sustainable, and it's incredibly competitive. The whole world is looking for nurses in a diminishing pool. The answer in the long run lies in our ability on the Isle of Man to produce our own registered nurses for adults, mental health, and I would also extend that to finding ways of producing our own midwives and our own children's nurses. this is quite a complex part of our workforce planning endeavour. And I'm inviting the board to consider receiving a report from me in a few months' time when I'm able to explore that in more detail and what the options might be for how we might increase domestic production of nurses on the Isle of Man. At this point, I think it's something we should do, but I don't know yet what I would recommend to the board. And I'll pause there for questions, Chairman.
Thank you, Paul. As I said, I think this is a really excellent report, and this really highlights probably the biggest challenge we've got facing Manx care, and it's featured in the quality section, it's featured in the workforce section. We'll come back to feature it in the finance section as well, because it lies at the heart of all this. So I think this is tremendous work. What I would like to sort of draw your attention to, Paul, is that I also work for Health Education England, and Health Education England is looking 15 years ahead at what is going to happen to workforce. And one of the things that it says is that the population as a whole is not going to increase very much, but the population over the age of 80 is going to increase dramatically, thus increasing significantly the demand for healthcare. And it projects the demand level for workforce and the supply level, and there's a gap between them. And you can close that gap partially by doing the things that you've said, international recruitment, increasing numbers of domestic, but you have to also find other ways to close the gap too. Things like skill mix, use of technology, promoting self-care, taking care out of hospital and into the community. So I guess what I strongly welcome your idea of producing a sort of more strategic report in 3 months' time, but I think it should not just be about workforce numbers, it should be those other gap-closing measures as well.
Yeah, but I happily look at that, Chairman. That'd be really helpful.
Sure. Sally.
And I just want to support what Paul's saying about that Grow Your Own. I'd like it extended that we have a Manx Care Integrated Academy for training for both social nursing, allied health professionals, and also, I think you just touched on it, Chair, that in the future, you know, if we are truly going to support people at home, we will be developing hybrid models. So I think that's absolutely right, but it needs, I'd love to see Kildare become, you know, an integrated care academy.
Yeah. Jim?
And just to pick up on that, I thought the paper was really helpful. And not wishing to overcomplicate it, but for the future, as an integrated organisation, where we can be thinking about where social care, occupational health, etc., occupational therapists are part of that mix, because there can be some wins for all the parties in terms of career pathways, which go through social care and into nursing, and then maybe back out again to social care. Who knows? But by having that joined up view and seeing the workforce as a whole, and completely agree in terms of the grow your own and the economic benefit to the island in terms of that as well. I think you should be not missed. Thank you.
Katie?
Thank you. Paul, you touched on international recruitment, and clearly once we've got them, we want to hang on to them.
Yes.
And I noticed there's some attrition. Could you just expand on that a little bit and what we're doing about that?
I'm afraid I can't give you the detail, but other than to say it's people from the Filipino cohort. We've lost 50% of those in this year. I don't have the detail as to why. I mean, I can take that away and come back to you on that.
I think it's important because I think as we get more and more in the door, we want to make sure that we're plugging the gap and they're not coming out the other end. But yes,
I've got some assumptions on it, but I want to be sure before I answer that question.
Okay, but thank you.
And of course, this report is about the nursing workforce, but the same issues apply to many other sectors. Sri, do you want to comment on the medical side?
Which is exactly what I was going to come round to say. Tim, your point about the fact that being an integrated care organisation, we should be actually producing a workforce report about primary care, secondary care, mental health, and everything else that goes with it. So while those numbers or those levels of safe staffing are not explicit as in the nursing can be, where you can actually objectively mark and say what is safe and what is not, there have been significant challenges in those areas as well. We've been lucky in the secondary care sector that we've managed to have a good recruitment at a senior level since Manx care induction. But the fact is that it remains, as a sustainable piece, it remains a significant challenge for us. So before we can celebrate on our kind of successful recruitment on senior force, I think we need to see the sustainability bit. And I think we just need to kind of comment on the earlier side of things. I think Manx Care, since the induction of Manx Care, we have actually looked through Teresa, through our service sustainability review. We looked at how do we improve the care that we provide here compared to what the care should be for our patients. So that was our prime concern. So we looked at individual specialties and matched that to what the new care that needs to be there. That provided us another further challenge as to upping our game as it was. How do we get those? And that would be, the forefront of that is what Sarah's paper is about, the ENT, the vascular services. Those are the other challenges that we have got about not just recruitment, but about keeping up to standard, sustainability of these services in the current area of where standards are increasing on a day-to-day basis. So those will be those key issues that we need to be monitoring as to how we provide our care to our patients that is acceptable and that is to the level that is available elsewhere for us. Yeah, thank you.
Cool.
Yeah, I think this absolutely highlights to me that we need to replicate this excellent piece of work across therapists, allied health professionals, medics, social workers, even just to describe a workforce planning baseline, which is probably unaffordable for the organisation, for the wider system, and will create the case for change around service sustainability. So what this very clearly tells me is we absolutely need to redesign our clinical delivery models using the basis of the service sustainability, using skill mix, role extension, technology, because actually if you replicated this piece of work for nursing across every other discipline, the price tag attached is unaffordable to the health and care system. So we have to redesign our clinical services rather than, but I think the baseline is incredibly important because it does create the case for change. We cannot not transform our services, redesign the clinical delivery models and do the workforce planning associated with those revised models. And I think that is an absolute urgency that we need to try and reflect and have made good progress on by the time we produce our 3-year strategy from next year. So I think it's just worth acknowledging this is an excellent piece of work, but there's a huge amount to do, but absolutely creates that case for change.
I'll just add to that. What's coming through on the cost improvement programme is the embryonic work in those areas, and some work has been done in a very localised way in specific teams around that. How do we deliver more with what we've already got rather than creating a bigger workforce? So I think there's a definite opportunity to build on that work that's happening to support the cost improvement programme.
That's the gap closing work that we're talking about. You won't solve this problem with numbers of bodies alone. You can improve it, but you've got to find other ways too. Right, we're beginning to get a little bit behind schedule, so I'm going to move us on. But thank you, Paul. I think the recommendations are accepted with the additional one about wanting to see a wider recruitment strategy in due course. Okay. Safeguarding structure update, Sally?
It became apparent when we were pulling together the annual report for the Safeguarding Board on behalf of Teresa, who's the board member, that we had quite a splintered approach to safeguarding within Manx Care. This report is advocating that Manx Care safeguarding resources are brought together in one team, an integrated team that will support all care groups across Manx Care. It will actually be the first step to the development of Manx Care's readiness to be part of a multi-agency safeguarding hub, also known as a MASH. This will see greater alignment with the Isle of Man Constabulary and other government departments, and the MASH will improve the quality of the information that is shared between professionals in order that they're able to make timely and informed decisions about risk base on accurate and up-to-date information. This will also see social work colleagues and the Isle of Man Constabulary colleagues co-located together. We have begun to work in a more aligned approach, and relationships between agencies, as reported, has been improved considerably. It's a very joined up vision and is supported fully by the Safeguarding Board. Myself and other colleagues from Manx Care and the Isle of Man Constabulary are visiting Liverpool and Knowsley and Wirral next week to look at their multi-agency safeguarding hubs, and we're also taking the opportunity to look at their Operation Medusa, which is an operation that's actually led by Liverpool Police on county line, so the criminal exploitation that has been obviously a concern that we've brought to the board previously. Myself as the Exec Director for Social Care will become the system lead for the safeguarding across Manx Care. That's what this paper is describing, and I will take responsibility for the design and operation of the quality assurance across both the health and social care system. The bringing together of safeguarding resources for Manx Care in no way dilutes the principles of safeguarding together. Safeguarding absolutely remains everybody's responsibility, and that will go back to, you know, the discussions we've just had about training of all of our staff at the appropriate levels. There's a further business case that's been developed further, that's going back to the business case review group on the 14th of September, and that's outlining the full rationale for additional safeguarding resources, mainly within our health functions, as a response to findings and recommendations of an independent review of adult safeguarding on the Isle of Man back in 2020 by Sylvia Manson. We're also including, we've had discussions with Dr. Oliver Ellis, who's with us today, around the role of a lead GP within safeguarding, and that's going to be built into the business case. Another benefit of having the resource supported this way is currently we support across Manx Care the board and several committees with lots of duplication of people attending, so we'll be able to streamline and be more efficient in how we service and support the board. So the report's asking that the board approves the creation of the Manx Care Integrated Safeguarding Team, that you request that I do develop the appropriate quality assurance frameworks and bring that back through the Quality Safety and Engagement Committee, further support the MASH, and obviously I will bring further progress. We're looking to develop the MASH between now and June next year, and I will update the board accordingly.
Tim, is it reasonable to ask you?
Just to welcome this report, and it makes absolute sense to have a hub bringing together different agencies, and particularly welcome that the police will be part of that. And of course, safeguarding being everybody's business goes across through housing in particular, and also the fire service, and so really welcome that. And I think also to say that while it is everybody's business, perhaps I would say this, wouldn't I? I think there is a special role for qualified social workers in this particular area of work, and I know that the director will try and balance that and ensure that that expertise isn't lost.
Just to add to that, I have asked, because if you saw the structure of our board, it probably isn't a structure that you would see elsewhere. So, as you just said, housing, I'd normally see fire and rescue on there. So I have asked for that membership to be reviewed.
Okay, well, I think by the absence of questions, you can take it that your recommendations are accepted there. So thank you for that, Sally, and it's another good reason to have Tim with us on the board to give us that assurance as well, so thank you. Right, one more item before we have a break, the update on restoration and recovery, Oliver.
So I'll just give a quick update in terms of the Phase 1 recovery and restoration programme. As the board will be aware, we've been lucky enough to secure 2.85 million of central government funding to help us recover our waiting list position in a number of areas, focusing purely on the waiting list that was accrued during the pandemic period, and that's spread across a number of specialties: endoscopy, cataracts, orthopedics, mental health, and some hospital outpatient. Within most of the Phase 1 activities are now in the process of winding up, because we are close to reaching the end of the 2.85 million available to us. Within endoscopy, we've delivered 458 endoscopy procedures, and so we've been able to reduce our endoscopy waiting list down under 6 weeks. Cataracts, we've undertaken 346 cataract operations. through Synaptic, who is our recovery and restoration partner, and that means that the waiting list is around 12 to 13 months at the moment. Within orthopaedics, we've delivered 115 hip and knee procedures, which is a joint venture between Synaptic and our own orthopaedic surgeons here at Nobles, and we've managed to not only deliver that 115 hip and knee procedures, we've reduced our length of stay down from 3 days to just under 1.5 days, and also within quite a number of lists through careful patient selection, we've managed to increase the throughput on most orthopaedic lists from 3 surgeries a day to 4. So, and given we are with our contracting arrangement, we've managed to achieve that without any additional cost to us. So the price for the original 100 procedures is still has been charged to us for allowing us to achieve 115. We've also commissioned Minds Matter, who is which is a third sector organisation on the island, providing mental health and wellbeing support to children and adults, and we've commissioned 457 patients to undergo trauma therapy, and 41 patients are already within that pathway, with another just over 100 to start their pathway. Within outpatients, we had originally intended to commission a virtual hospital model, so we partnered up with an organisation called Medifa to deliver virtual outpatients. We haven't quite achieved the level of productivity that we'd hoped with Medifa. However, we have very recently, yesterday actually, met with them here on the island to go through some of the operational issues, and they are fully engaged with the issues, and we've now got a jointly agreed way forward. As I mentioned in my earlier IPR report, we've also decided to commission some services to deliver additional activity within our current workforce. So at the moment that is neurology and cardiology. However, we hope to do some additional weekend ENT lists as well, some ENT sessions. So that is phase 1. As I mentioned, the majority of that phase 1 programme is coming to an end, with the final blocks of cataracts and orthopaedic surgery starting, well, orthopaedics, the last block started this week, and then the last block of cataracts starts next week. We do have we've written a business case, which we're terming phase 2 business case, which is going to be reducing the waiting lists within orthopaedic, cataracts and general surgery significantly, so to around 6 weeks for all of those 3 specialties, and that business case is currently being considered by government. We were invited to present the business case to Treasury, which we did jointly with the DHSC about 3 weeks ago, and that business case is now going through the government decision-making process. We're hoping to get an interim decision today in terms of securing the next 3 months of funding, with the main business case going to the next sitting of Tynwald, which we believe is towards the end of October, for the remainder. So, and then there is a phase 3 business case that we're starting to work on as well, which will be focused more on the outpatients. So although we've got Medifa working on the COVID-related backlog, we realise that there is significant waits in quite a number of specialties that will also need addressing, and the phase 3 business case will be addressing those, but we're intending for that to be a longer period of rollout. So rather than completing it within the space of 6 to 12 months, that business case will probably request funding for the phase 3 programme to be completed over the course of maybe 3 years, so that we can achieve an 18-week referral to treatment position, by the end of within the next 4 to 5 years, which is within our mandate as part of the Island Plan. One of the things that Phase 3 business case will address will not only be the recovery position, but also what funding we need substantively to address historic demand and capacity gaps, and also to put in the infrastructure for us to manage the referral to treatment process. Because having worked in that type environment, having worked to the 18-week referral to treatment process in the NHS before I moved to the island, I know that is a very administrative heavy process, and so we will need to increase the number of our administrative staff to help manage that whole pathway management and validation. But I'm confident that you know, given that we are mandated through both the Island Plan and also the DHSC plan offset from that we are on a pathway to achieve RTT within this administration's kind of period of being in office. So.
Okay, Oliver, thank you. So I think we probably need to come back to this when we've got the clarity on the response to those business cases. So we'll have some of that next time. And I'd like to, sorry?
Do you mind if I ask Oliver a question on that, please?
A brief question and a brief answer, please.
Oliver, obviously I've been involved with this piece of work, and I wonder if you could just talk to the board a little bit about what's been going on aside from the actual procedures themselves to ensure the sustainability of being able to maintain those waiting list positions once the third party steps away.
Yeah, so well, I think one of the, having worked for the DHSC for 6 years, I think one of the faults, you know, we have had investment in the past to help address waiting lists. You know, over the last 10 years, we've had a number of waiting list initiatives. Both of those, whilst achieving temporary improvements in the waiting list, unfortunately, because of the underlying demand and capacity and productivity issues, the waiting list slid back to what it was. So, and that's the worst thing that could happen here, you know, because we're spending millions of pounds of taxpayers' money to recover the waiting list. We have a duty as an organisation to maintain that waiting list. As part, one of the roles of the performance and improvement team is looking at the actual demand and capacity across all of those specialties. Some specialties we know have got a deficit of capacity. So, for example, cataract, we know that based on our current capacity within the ophthalmology service, we receive around twice as many cataract referrals than we have capacity for. So that's something that we would need to invest in substantively to maintain that waiting list. Within other specialties, we know that there is an excess of capacity, which means that once we've achieved the waiting list reduction, we'll be able to maintain that quite comfortably. So that's probably the underpinning piece of work that we have to do to make sure that we can sustain the waiting list position, and obviously we would need to find funding for that where there are substantive gaps. The other thing that we're doing is developing more robust performance trackers, so that each consultant has at the beginning of the year has a monthly plan which he or she has to deliver based on not only outpatient appointments but also inpatient procedures, particularly elective procedures, and where those performance, so delivery of appointments against those plans are tracked by the individual service team, and where there are deviations from that, there is a plan so that we can pull back that. So rather than at the moment, which is there's really no monitoring of delivery of outpatient appointments, this will become a much more focused piece of work for the individual service teams to do.
Okay, well, it's good that you did bring that up, but I do want to bring this to an end now to give us a break, because we've got at least 3 more very important items to get through. So if we take a 10-minute break now, so restart at past. Prompt, please. Thank you. Going to restart now. Again, we've got sort of 3 quite substantial items to get through, and I'm going to try and give sufficient time to each one, so please permit me to move the agenda on when the time comes. So we'll start off with the update on the Cqc inspection, Paul.
Chairman, thank you very much. This is a paper that's just giving the board an update on where we are with the CQC and some initial findings that the CQC have raised with us, just for awareness and information. I think it's fair to say the inspection programme is absolutely well underway. We're moving through it at some pace now, and I would anticipate being at the end of the inspection programme by the end of October. Thereafter, the CQC will be finalising their reports, and then hopefully, in fairly short order thereafter, we should be in a position to understand in totality what the issues are that we need to tackle and how we go about doing that. I've given the board the benefit of some information that's come through already on observations that the CQC have made to us. I don't need to go through them. I think they're self-explanatory, but I think it's very encouraging. The CQC are also finding things that are good, as well as things that need to be improved, and that fills me with a lot of confidence and a lot of hope, and in particular pulling out the attention to personalised care that the CQC can see when they go about their business, which is great. I'm not surprised by the issues that the CQC have identified as being areas for improvement. I think as a board and as an executive, we are very well versed on what we expect the CQC to find, and they are finding what we thought they would find. And I think it's helpful assurance, both internally to Manx Care and externally to our strategic partners and stakeholders, because it will require a coming together of how we tackle some of this stuff. And I say that because a number of the areas where the CQC are pointing out, they touch on aspects of the shared service model of which we rely in order to deliver our service, which might need changing. Again, I've been open, honest, up front and quite candid with the board about the issues that have been escalated to the Department of Health. These are important things that will need to be addressed. The thing that I think has surprised me a little bit, because it was one of my unknown unknowns, but health and safety management is standing out as a bit of a challenge. And for those who are wondering what kind of things are being identified, it's largely 3 areas. It's water safety management, the safety and suitability of the premises where people are cared for, and the control of substances hazardous to health. Those are things that we cannot really allow to be like that, and we have to put them right, and we will put them right. But it will need a big strategic plan, I think, to determine in totality what are the areas that the CQC are asking us to deal with, what are the areas that are within Manx Care's sole control to resolve, what are the areas does Manx Care need prioritisation from the shared services, and in what areas does Manx Care have the funding to take these issues forward, and over what timescale. And I think and we'll inject some pace into that and some realism into that discussion as soon as the round of inspections have concluded. I'm happy to take questions if there are any.
Okay, so thank you for that, Paul. I think you're absolutely right in pointing out that we know that there are going to be issues raised because we've been discovering them ourselves over the last 18 months. And I think congratulations to you and your team for the work that you've put in on the governance, the 10 steps process, which I think demonstrate that we acknowledge these and we're putting steps in hand to deal with them. I just wonder if I could ask Oliver if you want to say anything about the experience in primary care, because initially there was some alarm about the reports, but is that easing now?
Yeah, no, I think it's fair to say that in general practice, across general practice, there was a lot of concern and a lot of apprehension. There have been challenges coming out of the CQC reports, and we have been challenged, I suppose, as a profession, as general practitioners, to make improvements. I think that's a task that we're looking forward to, really. We're looking forward to using the guidance that the CQC has given us to see how we can better serve our patients and how we can improve quality. So we're at the early stages, it's fair to say, of responding to the CQC reports. We've had sight, we being the primary care network, has had sight of almost all of those that have been done so far. And so we're looking forward now to working with Paul and our other colleagues to, I think, probably identify trends and big ticket issues, big items, and see how we can address them on a sort of at scale.
Good, Teresa. Yep.
Yes, I mean, one of my anxieties ahead of the well-led component particularly is both the data we have, the data quality that we have, and I think that will be incredibly limiting for us. And we will not be able to demonstrate sufficiently well and robustly in that well-led domain. And I'm just sort of interested to understand from the CIO and perhaps yourself, Director of Nursing, Paul, as to if there's any more we can do around that data piece ahead of the well-led inspection at the end of October, or whether anything we need to task the Data and Digital Subcommittee of the board to particularly take forward to assist us to get in as good a place as possible, recognising we're now only 8 weeks away from that well-led inspection.
Richard, do you want to go first? Or?
Well, the engagement with the inspections has come through the transformation programme for the last probably about a year. The data requests have been coming in through the transformation programme for that, and we've provided all the information that we have to that. That's all been on the project plan for the inspections. But I'm not aware of any additional interventions that we could make that would accelerate or give any additional information.
I'm just wondering whether it would be more helpful to at least have visibility on where our data limitations are as a board. So in preparation for the well-led, we can at least try and explain some of that. So we can demonstrate the areas where we have better assurance, but the board needs to be cited on the areas of the well-led where we definitely are recognising a data gap which may compromise our overall assessment and rating.
Yeah, Teresa, I think you raise an incredibly important point, and I think we do have some data gaps. My advice would be that if we take the quality dashboard that I've attempted to give us an indication of the data quality against every measure, and by and large those data quality ratings are low or at best medium, with the exception of 1 or 2. And that generally reflects the amount of manual data collection that's required and how error prone that can be. I think knowing that, though, as you say, is extremely important. The second thing is we're going to get asked about risk management, we're going to get asked about performance management, and I would say we've got some challenges there with data without question. The important thing for us, I would say, is that as a board we acknowledge where we are not sure about the quality and robustness of the data, but we don't shy away from using what we have got, because we have to navigate a way through regardless. Using what we have got to make the best possible decisions that we can make, but creating an environment in this room where we're able to challenge each other's assumptions when that's what we're relying on, our gut instinct, and not necessarily robust data. And as long as we can create a safe space to reach a point where we can make and execute decisions as a board, I think that will go a long way towards getting us through the well-led inspection.
Thank you, Paul.
Okay, thanks. Well, in the interest of time, I'm going to move on now, but I would like us to continue to be discussing the CQC process probably at all the boards for the rest of this year. So, can we move on to the next important item, which is the Social Care Investigation Report?
Thank you, Chair. The board's well cited on the work that's been undertaken in the social care group in respect of the workplace culture. Work in respect of culture has been far the biggest focus of my time since I've been in post. But we know if workplace culture is not right, then we're not going to achieve the best outcomes for the people who use our services. So the focus of my time has been absolutely essential. The Exec Summary that you have describes 2 significant pieces of work that have been undertaken to really understand what culture within social care has been and consider what does the good culture look like. The work undertaken has always had the focus of improvement. In an email to the Chair of the Board and to Teresa as CEO on Easter Monday in 2021, the culture was starting to be vividly described, and through this email and several meetings I had with staff, a list of 17 characteristics of the culture were being described, and they're on page 2 of the report. I'm not going to read them all out. A focused piece of work was undertaken by the Workforce and Culture Development team, and this included surveys, drop-in sessions, one-to-one sessions, and it was provided to both frontline staff and managers separately. The independent investigation focused on 17 behaviours said to be present within the social care culture. Again, as I said, they're on page 2 of the Exec Summary. This investigation concluded that 11 of those alleged behaviours could actually be evidenced. By far, one of the biggest concerns was the staff were managed by fear of disciplinary action, but also bullying and micromanagement are also common behaviours that have impacted on colleagues significantly. This Exec Summary was shared with all of our social care staff last Monday, the 22nd of August, as an embargo copy, obviously until today's board meeting, because it didn't feel right that the first time that our colleagues found the conclusions was at a public board meeting. Last Wednesday, Teresa and I presented the report and spoke to staff within a social care special, Let's Connect, and made ourselves available last Thursday and Friday if any staff needed to come and speak to us. There was little uptake on that, and actually what we did have was lots of emails thanking us for the work that has been done to actually call out the culture in social care and to actually show that determination that our focus is actually ensuring that our care values have been put into action consistently within all our behaviours. There are still staff who have concerns that potentially actions from the findings have not gone far enough. This, however, is a situation that has been required fine balancing of all the factors that need to come into play, and Teresa and I will meet with other teams as requested to discuss these issues further. We also had an extraordinary Let's Connect yesterday and shared the Exec Summary with colleagues across Manx Care. The next steps in the action plans are in your papers today, and there's also a list of quite a few actions of what we'd already taken prior to getting any of the conclusions from the 2 pieces of work. We still have a way to go, but I'm actually personally very proud of where we've got to over the last year, and our colleagues are expressing how better their working lives are, and it really hits home when somebody says, because my working lives are so much better, my personal life is so much better as well, and my family life. We've made 9 appointments over the last 6 months in social care, all have promoted positions within social work, and we've seen all of those promotions from within or people returning to the care group. A report from an independent review of adult safeguarding undertaken in 2020 by Sylvia Manson reflected heavily on the culture in social work and how she felt this was impacting on social work practice in respect of safeguarding. Sylvia returned earlier this year and she to review progress, and there's still progress to be made and some improvements to be made, but she made significant comment on having interviewed staff across social work of how much people were saying that the culture that they are working in has improved, and that is impacted on obviously their practice. My final point would be to say thank you for the colleagues who actually did show the courage and take the time to engage in both these pieces of work and allow us to actually start creating a culture that we're all proud of and that does actually follow our care values. I'd also like to thank the board and exec colleagues because it's been a hard piece of work and I have felt supported throughout it.
Thank you, Zoe. I just wanted to highlight 2 things of what you've just said. You described a culture where management is by fear of disciplinary action, which is something I've almost never heard of before. I mean, that's not just in social care, anywhere at all, and clearly not the way to run anything at all. And the second is just how important it is that this was exposed, came out, been understood, talked about, action plan to deal with it, because if it hadn't, then obviously this would just be continuing exactly the same as now. So this is a horror story and a success story all in one go. So well done to you for doing that. Again, as I say, it's not explicitly because it's social care, but Tim, did you want to comment on this?
No, just to acknowledge that, as you said, a significant, serious issue had been discovered, And like yourself, I'm sure, like the director, haven't come across this in social care before. I think it's been really good the way that Manx Care has grasped that and has taken action. And it's clearly fundamental in terms of retaining staff and providing services and support to the people of the island, that we have a good working environment and a place where it's a pleasure to come and do your work and enjoy your work. And I think that the necessary steps are in place to make sure that happens. Thank you.
Paul? Chairman, thank you. I want to pay tribute to Sally, and reading the paperwork, it's kind of felt to me I could take the word social care out, and I was reading something that I could identify right across a number of areas. And as whilst I don't find that comfortable being able to say that, I think it's bigger than just social care. But the point I want to make is, in my experience, people are motivated by just two things, fear or excitement. And I think our job as leaders is to build the excitement in the way in which we do our business. And I think that will have that will probably deliver for us manifestly different environment for people to work in, just because it's exciting to be there and people are inspired to do things that they want to do and, you know, climb the mountains that they want to climb with us. And I think it will then enable them and us to cope with some of the things that are not great.
Yeah, well said, Paul. Carrot always better than stick. Anybody else? I think we've sort of made the main points. Other than perhaps we could have an update. I don't know when you feel would be appropriate, but it would be good to get a progress report in a period of time.
Well, yeah, I have said the recommendation that we need to actually determine, you know, how frequently. I would suspect this would go through the People Committee.
Yeah.
And maybe we do.
Maybe 6 months or something like that.
Yeah.
To hear. Yeah. Okay. Right. Okay. Thank you very much. Ooh, sorry about that. That's what you told me not to do. Right. Moving on to the BMA. Again, if this can just be a brief update.
Of course, yes. So we, the BMA, in conjunction with Manx Care, conducted the cultural survey, Culture of Care Barometer survey, back in March. The board in May accepted the findings of that survey. You know, it wasn't a pleasant read, but as Sally has identified, a lot of those themes are needing to be acknowledged. It's important we use this as a baseline from which we would then improve. So that is what we have done. We have worked in conjunction with the local negotiating committee, the BMA, the clinical directors, the medical staffing group as a totality, to develop this action plan, which is here for approval. It is an iterative document. We will continue to refine it as we go on. We are recommending that it would come back to the board on a regular basis, but with oversight from the People Committee, probably on a monthly basis. I think, just picking up on a lot of what Sally said, what our staff really need to see is progress against this. They have heard it time and time again. For a number of staff, it's a long-standing, so it's years worth of concern they aired and had the bravery to share with us. It's really important we move swiftly and decisively on delivering against both of these plans, so staff can start to have that confidence this board absolutely will move this all in the right direction at pace. So I'd like to propose that it goes to the People Committee every month and probably a quarterly update to the board, actually. A little bit more frequently if the board is willing to accept that. But the board is just asked to approve the Culture of Care Barometer Action Plan in the papers today.
I think we accept that. Thank you. And we would like to see the updates in due course. Okay, so now we've been trying to carve out a good portion of time for the issue of finance, which has pretty much come to ahead recently, hasn't it? So, Nigel, I think you're going to introduce this item.
Thank you, Andrew. Yes, obviously colleagues know that I chair the Finance and Performance Commissioning Committee meeting, and firstly, may I echo your thoughts in saying how good it is to be back in Royal Ramsey, shining by the sea. Not many people will know that I was born and bred and brought up in Ramsey, so it's great to be home. And as they say up here, you can take the boy out of Ramsey, but... Indeed. So a serious subject of finance. Chairman, colleagues, I make no apology for what is going to be a slightly longer contextual introduction to the report of the FP&C meeting held a little over a week ago. And I make this introduction not to steal the wind from our Executive Finance Director, who also will talk, but to support her and her team, who have already submitted to exhaustive questioning at the FP&C meeting. As ever, the meeting was long and purposeful, with lively debate and robust questioning from colleagues and the senior leadership team. And it will be no secret to you that we live and operate in a time of heightened financial tension. And not unreasonably, this translates into concerns and political pressures, some more overtly expressed than others, that perhaps the financial governance within Manx Care is not up to the job. Well, as chair of your subcommittee, I believe that I can assure you that I perceive it is more than up to the job. However, in our year of discovery, my observation would be that we have had no choice but to be reactive in our year of discovery. But I detect that we're tipping the balance in being in favor of proactive, an unusual name. But this does not mean that there exists a magic wand that can be waved by the money fairy, and that we can reach financial nirvana either in the short period of time or indeed without cutting our cloth according to our means. And as you'll see from the papers, we have received a very clear directive that it is imperative that we meet our financial envelope this year. Now, in island terms, and part of the greater scheme of things, we remain a supertanker because of the sheer wall of existing need, never mind transformative change that exists. And if you spin the wheel now, then maybe, just maybe, it will turn in a year's time. So we need to be more nimble. We need to be quicker. We need to be more reactive. And we need to call upon those who make strategic decisions to influence our operating environment to be faster too. But despite all of that, there are things that we can do. There is a plan that will bring us back into balance our budget, but this will not happen unless the status quo, if the status quo rather, is allowed to persist. Some things will not happen without strategic judgment calls being made by our masters, and every action will, of course, have a reaction. So the papers speak for themselves, but there are one or two items, if I may, Chair, I'd like to bring out and flush out, because, you know, the numbers tell a story, and the story is imperative. So there persists a forecast of a deficit on our budget of nearly £9 million by the end of March 2023, and clearly this is not acceptable, but it should not be a surprise. The service has been £10 million or so adrift for many years, and most of our additional funding last year that was subject to the supplementary vote has been used up in drug costs, staff costs, and non-controllable items. And indeed, as we've heard today, we started from a low baseline position last year in our understanding of the budget process. And maybe given that anecdotal evidence, maybe the budget process needs a fundamental root and branch review. This forecast deficit is clearly after increased scrutiny by a professional board living the values of the organisation and a cost improvement plan that is developing. All this against the background of Brexit, COVID, Ukraine, inflation, and resultant global pressures in the healthcare industry. It is cold comfort, perhaps, that we are not alone in this predicament. Many of these costs are employee-related, and to combat this, we must have and seek a fit-for-purpose human relations recruitment and retention strategy that is facilitated, in my view, by fast-track decision-making, by our empowered managers who are not moribunded in an outdated process of employing people in an ever-competitive market. We need to recruit quicker, and it is not just about the money. It touches accommodation costs, lifestyle, education, and development that is fit for purpose. That is key. And you will see from the paper that tertiary costs too are now increasing as they return to pre-COVID levels. And without strategic change, these costs are essentially non-controllable to us. But we have a back to balance plan that has been debated and stands scrutiny. However, the success of it will depend upon the implementation of policy changes that are currently not in our remit. We need quicker turnaround from stakeholders, and any delays will translate into maintenance of the status quo and the resultant opportunity cost savings being lost. We're, of course, supported by Merseyside Internal Audit, as our people are already dreadfully stretched and do not have the time to work on the business when they're so busy in the business maintaining the status quo. Without this help and implementation, change will not become embedded and the matter will revert to the status quo. But we can and will achieve a balanced budget if these things can happen. I'd like to talk briefly about the budget submission for 22-23. That has now been submitted by the department to Treasury, and it was subjected to a collegiate and strategic debate between the senior leadership team and the DHSC, at which it was felt that agreement had been reached. However, the submission that has been made to Treasury, as you will see from the papers, will result in a shortfall of 17 million in the next year. Why? It is interesting to note that if the funding model that Sir Jonathan Michael pointed out in his recommendations had been followed, we would actually be in considerable surplus next year. Clearly, final consideration will not be made until October when the Treasury considers this, but it appears as if the process may not work properly, and we need to find that imperative of what I've referred to as strategic alignment between all the parties that are interested in this outcome. It is simply not good enough to demand that Manx Care delivers. You cannot effectively delegate and not give the power. The final point I'd like to touch on, please, is unfunded mandated objectives. So the Manx Care Act requires mandate objectives to be funded, and some of the current objectives are simply not funded. Now, we're not reaching for the contract, but once again, the alignment that I allude to is absolutely key, dare I say vital. For example, there are few that would fail to espouse the principles of referral to treatment timescales, but the practical implications, and Oliver touched on this earlier on, for our organisation are incredibly costly, running into many thousands, if not millions of pounds, that could actually be better spent elsewhere. So, in conclusion, I'm mindful of the tales of ancient Greece, where the messenger who brought good news received a sack of gold. Bad news, not so attractive. And all this is notwithstanding the amazing passion, commitment and hard work and care of colleagues who deliver this service, and of whom I think we can be very proud, and that we are now beginning to see as non-executives in the flesh, so to speak, post the COVID pandemic, as we're able to get out into the field. But in my submission and introduction, and I'll pass on to Jackie to follow, now is the time to strive for that alignment that is needed so that we can balance our budget and earn our spurs and get on our path to delivering that vision of the best small healthcare service in the world. It is eminently achievable, but it will take time, and sadly there is no magic money tree to shake, nor should there be. Thank you.
Thank you, Nigel. That's an excellent summary. Jackie, I'd like you to be as brief as possible because I want to have as much time for discussion and questions as possible. So please take it that we've read all the papers, but then say whatever you want to say.
Okay, so I think that in terms of the management accounts, it's well rehearsed. We're very familiar with what's causing our overspend, as Nigel alluded to. The single biggest driver is employee costs, and as Paul mentioned before, some of the difficulties that we're seeing operationally translate into these financial pressures. And it's that constant tension between delivery and finances that will never go away. That's going to be with us forever. That's part of the system. In part of that then is how do we get from our 8.7 million forecast overspend that's sitting in our management accounts back to balance at the end of this financial year. And it's, as Nigel has said, you know, it's absolutely imperative, and we're very, very clear that that's what we need to deliver in this year. So what we've worked on is what we're calling our back to balance plan. So I'd just like to talk some numbers for a few moments, if that's all right. Hopefully I won't lose you all. This is the boring bit. So we're starting with a deficit of 8.7 million. The DHSC has been given a reserve fund by Treasury in this year of 6.5 million. And the purpose of that reserve fund is basically to act as a contingency to allow it to absorb unexpected cost pressures within Manx Care without necessarily needing to revert back to Treasury with business cases and so forth. So it offers a degree of flexibility between the two organisations about addressing these things. So we've already agreed with the DHSC that approximately 2.5 million will be set aside from that reserve fund to cover some high-cost patients. So at the moment we've got about 1.5 million of high-cost patients. And how we determine high-cost patients is not simply because of the financial number associated with them, but that it's usually unusual things or things that don't come along very often, so you wouldn't normally be able to plan for them. And then the second bit is that our private patients unit has continued to be kept closed this year. It's being utilised to support the restoration and recovery work. So the DHSC have indicated that they would be happy to utilise the reserve fund for that. So that leaves approximately £4 million in the reserve fund that theoretically is available to Manx Care. Now, we could do a simple mathematical exercise and say, well, let's put that 4 against what's left, and we've only got 2 million left to find. But the reality is that there are other pressures that we're aware of on the horizon that haven't happened yet. Things around, so we're expecting a judgment in the tribunal case later on in the year. The IG fine, we're hopeful we won't have to pay that, but just in case. So there are various things that we need to provide for, which are not in our forecast. And therefore, I think we need to assume, for prudence, that none of that additional money in the reserve fund is available to us at the moment. We couldn't count on it. So what that leaves us with is we need to find an additional £6 million in order to bring us back into balance. We already have a SIP plan of 4 million built into our target. We're performing really well against that. We've achieved almost just over half of that so far this year. And it's delivering well against it. But now what we need to do is we need to supercharge that programme. And there's a couple of ways that we plan to do that. One is that we're going to take the current work streams that we have and that we're working on. We valued the potential in there to be around 7 million, but we've risk adjusted that amount down based on things like delays to decision making or other things that need to happen. And the single biggest challenge to SIP delivery is actually operational capacity within the organisation. So as Nigel says, people are busy delivering. They're coming out of their offices and putting on uniforms to deliver frontline services. And this is the sort of stuff that falls away. So the delivery model that we've worked together with MIAA on is very much about putting in that on-the-ground resource to get it done, rather than just telling us what we should be doing and telling us how we're progressing. So that's working really well. So if we can unlock some of that resource, then we can get more out of the existing SIP plan. Then the next step is to expand that SIP plan and bring further activity into that. So we have a long list of opportunities that we're looking at, and a number of those were designed to be delivering next year or the year after. So the thing is to accelerate that, so to bring some of that delivery forward and to expand the range and scope of the SIP. So this year our SIP plan, cost improvement plan, ranges across the whole organisation rather than last year where it focused on some really specific work streams. And then there are other things that we as a board and as an exec may choose to do which are not strictly SIP. So from a cost improvement plan point of view, we determine those as savings that once they are made, they are gone. They move out of the organisation permanently and they don't come back. But there are a range of things that we may need to consider and do in this year that would be temporary cost-saving measures in order to achieve balance. So the Back to Balance plan will be a combination of all of those things. There are risks associated with delivery of those. The department has committed to providing some additional resource to help us accelerate that delivery. And it will be a constantly moving feast, and some things will drop off, new things will come in. So we'll be constantly monitoring that as we go between now and the end of the year. So I think that's
Thanks, Jackie. That's an excellent summary. And the only thing I would add to what you and Nigel have said is to try and understand this from the point of view of the government. And clearly there is a global financial crisis. Governments everywhere around the world are facing the same issues of citizens saying, I need help, businesses saying, I need help, organisations saying, I need help. And basically there are hands reaching out to them from everywhere. And in that context, when they see us forecasting a approaching £10 million deficit, the message has been, you've got to sort that out, and we're not going to give you any more money. And I think I understand and respect that. But as Jackie and Nigel have outlined, we can do that. We will forecast to do that. We plan to do it. But there are some bits of help we will need from DHSC and the Transformation Fund and other parts of government. And with that help, we will expect to achieve balance this year. And then finally, the point that Nigel also made is that this situation is not any result of incompetence or lax management. Jackie has described all of the financial pressures that are resulting in this deficit, none of which are within our control, except possibly one, which is the staffing one. And as Jackie has said before, we could solve our problem if we simply close services down. But, you know, we're not like Lloyd's Pharmacy, where you can just close a service down. These are 24/7 services that we cannot do that to. So I think it is a strong message. We will balance the books. We do need the support that's been promised, and then we expect to do so. So I would invite anybody else who wants to ask any questions. Andy?
I just want to point out one thing, I think, which is that back to balance is not the same as achieving the mandate objectives. Because the mandate objectives aren't funded, I don't think there's so much of an obligation to complete that. And I think we need to be clear when we discuss with DHSC that, okay, our priority is getting back to balance. I fully understand that in the current climate, but actually you can't then hit us, you know, with a brickbat which says, but you didn't achieve your mandate objectives. But if you don't fund them as they should be funded under the legal arrangement, then there is no obligation to complete those. So I think we need to be very careful about balancing. One thing is not the other, and we need to disconnect those two where there is insufficient funding, or it's not made clear where that funding is within our budget. So I think we just need to be, you know, we achieve one thing, and in the background we're hit on the back of the head with something else which isn't necessarily related. So I think we just need to make sure we disconnect those two items.
Very good point.
If I could just respond to that.
Yeah, do.
I think you raise a good point, not just about mandated objectives, but much more widely, is that the key here is prioritisation. There will always be more to be spent on than we have resource for. We're never going to find ourselves in a situation here where we sit around saying, we've got plenty of money, what are we going to do with it? It's always going to be a constraint. So we need to prioritise. And we've been very clear in communicating, even that's been unusual, communicating very clearly with our colleagues and our staff about what the actuality of our financial position is, which in of itself is new, but also that it's about prioritising, and we really need to focus on our basics. We need to focus on compliance. We need to focus on safety, and that's what we're doing with our spend at the moment, and that's pulled through into how we've approached our budget setting for next year, which is prioritising that spend, saying, here's the stuff we can't avoid, here's the stuff that's statutory or compliance related, mandate objectives are the third priority, and then you have everything else. And the gap that Nigel referred to in terms of next year's budget would mean that we wouldn't be able to meet the current mandated objectives with the funding envelope that's been requested. So we've had clear conversations with the department outlining that mandated objectives may need to fall away because of the funding constraints and where we need to focus our funding on the core activity.
Can I respond, please, Chair?
Please do.
So I agree with everything you said, Jackie. I think all I'm trying to say is that if we agree what we're prepared to discuss, which lies within the things we might be able to achieve, then I think that way, if DHSC or the Minister steps outside that, then I think we have reason to say, well, actually, we did discuss this in advance. Because even as you say, the priorities, the cost of some of those priorities are not within our control to achieve within the financial envelope. So things could shift at the end of the year and still leave us slightly adrift of where we intended to be. we all want to be in balance, of course we do. I mean, I sort of view it as a bit of a failure of duty not to, particularly under the circumstances. But some things you just simply cannot prevent. And I think as long as we've got, if you like, we've got a list of what we're prepared to answer to, if you like, then the other bits are for discussion. So if, for instance, the cost of locums goes through the roof by an extra 30%, which we can't control, then clearly we're not going to quite make it to over the finish line. And I think we just need to be able to say, look, we're happy to discuss that, and these are the reasons why.
I think the only thing about that is that Jackie's plan has a range of actions, CIPs, mitigations, which if they were all achieved, would overachieve the... So there is some room for coping with things going wrong, but I agree with you, if something major went wrong, say there was a major pay increase, for example, that would be, very difficult to afford separately. Paul, you wanted to come in?
A few points, if I may, Chairman. Just building on what Nigel said, you mentioned Newtonian conventions, actions having an equal and opposite reaction. I think there's a message in there, I think, for us, which I think I'm hearing loud and clear, is that as a board, we have to absolutely understand the impact of the decisions that we make in order to bring ourselves back to balance. And it would be easy to do that were it not the fact that we're dealing with patients who are sick and the demand for their care is rising. And when they present to us in a post-pandemic era, they are more acutely unwell. They have tolerated their illnesses for a longer period of time and deconditioned at a faster rate. And that really hasn't been factored in. So I think when we think about how we get back into balance, I think as a board, our duty is to understand whether we can tolerate, or the public can tolerate, the implications of that decision on their own health. And I think that's an important point. The second thing I think I'd say is about, if we make decisions in this way with just 6 months to go, we'll be doing the same again next year and the year after and the year after. We're on a hamster wheel. And there's something about budget setting for me that needs a fundamental think. I go back to a point I made before, which I think is very important. We have to be able to look ahead at the horizon and see what's coming. We have to absolutely understand that demand profile for us and be able to match our budget formulas to that demand profile. And then we can match our staffing to that demand profile, etc. All the pieces of the jigsaw start to come together, but a short-term budget loop makes that almost impossible for us to do. So it's something about taking that long-term view, which I think is essential. It's even more important when we come to make efficiencies. A big portion of our expenditure is pay. We cannot, even with the greatest will in the world, make changes to that within a 6-month horizon. That is long-term strategic thinking. So there's something for me about the whole process. It needs to be very different. The final point I'd make is about value. I really think we need, quality, safety, finances, performance, they're all part of the same thing. And they work together. And when they work together really well, each one of those things can drive exemplary progress in the right direction. But where we focus on just one of those things at the expense of the other, there are problems. So if we just focus on quality at the expense of finances, there will be problems for us. But if we also focus on finances at the expense of quality, there'll be problems for us. We have to find a way of bringing it together. And for me, I think that's the epicenter of our discussions are about value for money. And as rapidly as we can, getting to a place where we can demonstrate that what we're spending is extracting the maximum amount of value on product for that spend. And I think that's the place where we should go as quickly as we can as a board.
Yep.
I would just echo everything that Paul has just said. There's been reports brought to the board today, the culture report in social care, which absolutely highlight the impact on staff well-being and culture and quality from financial decisions that were made 5-6 years ago, which we are still living with the impact of that. So it is really important we understand the impact of the decisions that we make, and we plan accordingly. Our staff are regulated by the Nursing and Midwifery Council, by the General Medical Council, by the HCPC, Body for Allied Health Professionals, and so we owe it to our staff to be able to ensure that the safety and compliance of the services we deliver are of the high standard, not to put our staff in a position of compromising their registration. So any any service changes we need to make, any CIPs we have to make, must be properly impact assessed to make sure the well-being of our staff is taken care of, but importantly, our patients must be taken care of, so harm reviews, impact assessments must go alongside that. We must understand the consequences of the decisions that we make. And I think that's why, you know, the board will continue to be very closely sighted on this with that scrutiny through the Finance and Performance Committee. But, you know, we absolutely acknowledge we have to get back into balance. And I think the executive have that responsibility to put in those parameters which enable us to fully assess the impact of that and bring the board through to those schemes.
So that last point you made, I was just going to go back to Nigel to finish this item, is we do look to the Finance, Performance and Commissioning Committee to now scrutinise the delivery of that plan. And, you know, CIPs are notoriously difficult to deliver. The advantage of ours is that it's an evidence-based one for actions that have been completed elsewhere. But nonetheless, it will take muscle in terms of management time and resource to do that. And your committee, Nigel, I hope will scrutinise and ensure us that that is happening.
No pressure, Andrew. Yes, absolutely, and I'm very happy it does, because what we've created is we've created a sounding board and a debating forum where we look and we tease out the nuances of decision-making in financial terms, and we do examine that duty of care, that fiduciary duty that goes hand in hand with finance. It's not all about the money. Ironic for an accountant to say that, but it's not. And I think this is very important in the way in which we run, because there are geopolitical forces at bay here, you know, in terms of where are we going as an island, where are we going for our people. There is, as I said, a wall of need out there, and we need to attend to it. And so it's not just as simple as cutting and just chopping. It's not. It's investment, and we mustn't lose sight of those imperatives in doing that. So a very challenging and very exciting time, actually, to get it right, and it's all to get it right, and we will.
Thank you. Now, we were due to have Barbara here, but she's not here yet. So I think we'll just skip on to the questions from the public and hope that she turns up any moment. No. As is now customary, Mr. Mann has kindly sent us a list of questions in advance, which, given the volume, is very helpful to us because it gives us the time to give you the answers. And we've given you those answers, I think, in your hand there, and we will publish them along with the minutes. So now it's the opportunity for members of the public to raise any questions that you like.
Two glimmers of light around the boardroom table this morning. One from the lady from social care who explained that their clients couldn't afford to switch the electricity on. And the other glimmer has come from Mr. Moore here, who's indicated that your accounting projections and so on are for a too short a period. Mr. Chairman, you've got a situation where we've got massive inflation. And I haven't heard a word about inflation management. Your £4.5 million worth of resources will have already been eaten up if you consider, if you stopped and added your figures up now, how much inflation has already eaten into your operation. The wage agreements and payments you've just reached with your staff
have already been overtaken by inflation. So the period going forward now that you budgeted for, I read last night, I went through 82 and 300 odd pages of forward notes. And I saw the options A and options B and the options referred by the Minister that effectively leaves this operation standing still. It doesn't even leave the money to do the, as we've said, the mandated tasks. But it's worse than that, Mr. Chairman, because if you apply even at the current level of 10% inflation, which isn't highlighted in the figures, you're 10% behind. And on a massive operation like Manx Care, being 10% behind already in figures that weren't budgeted for, going forward now with the anticipated increase in inflation into next year that could rise as high as even 20%. Those two options, A and B, are so far adrift, Mr. Chairman, that you're going to be in a major difficulty. Your staff are going to be coming to you again in a few months' time from all the major organisations and saying, we need more money. We're already seeing the strikes and so on in the UK across a whole load of service industries. It's going to hit Manx Care, and those figures you've got an option A and B, Mr. Chairman, this is not going to work. I can't see at the moment.
Okay, well, I think it's meant to be questions from members of the public rather than...
I'm just asking what the question is, Mr. Chairman.
What plans have we got for inflation?
What now are we going to hear from your finance committee as to why they haven't addressed that?
Okay. Okay, Jackie, do you want to take the issue of inflation?
I can take that. So in terms of the issue of inflation for this year, the bulk of our costs are staff related, which are subject to a different type of inflation. And we've discussed the issues around pay awards, which is separate, and that's a government-wide piece. In terms of general inflation, we have made adjustments within our forecast for what general inflation is looking like at the moment in terms of the impact that it has on our figures. In terms of the budgeting formulae for next year, both options use the growth funding formula, which we're the only body in government to have the benefit of, which is a growth amount of 3.03% plus less our SIP, which is our efficiencies. So for the purposes of the budgeting for next year, we have assumed a rate of inflation of 10%. If, however, the rate of inflation is different to that, higher or lower, then the actual amount of money awarded will be dependent on what the actual inflation is at the time or is anticipated to be. So whilst there's a number in there, it's an indicator because we're aware that inflation is a movable feast. Well, well, no, because we can't assume that staff wages will necessarily increase by inflation. Wages don't automatically increase by inflation. They may increase by more, they may increase by less, and we've made adjustments for those.
But in reality, you've already the wage increases you've just given have already been completely absorbed by inflation. Anybody who had those recent increases is just going to be looking and saying, well, it's actually got us nowhere. We're still behind. So you're going to get hit very rapidly with the unions wanting to see more money.
Which is exactly what we said, that the back to balance plan is predicated on there not being a substantial increase in wage inflation. And I think at the moment it would be inappropriate for us to talk here in a public board about the negotiations that are taking place with trade unions, but we are extremely aware of the point that you're making and we understand it.
Yeah. If we go back to the social care plans, they've already realised that you can't switch the electricity on. It's not going to take long for the average nurse to realise the extra cost of getting to work on the fuel and all their other household expenses. They're going to need a higher rate.
Which was part of the question that I asked the CEO at the beginning, if you remember, about provision for cost of living and hardship allowances, which is happening in the UK, and the CEO has assured us that that is in play. So yes, we absolutely understand that.
And just on the back of that, Mr. Chairman, you talked about the organisation you're part of in the UK having a 15-year plan. Don't we got any comments as to getting a 15-year plan in for Manx care? For everything, for medical centres, extensions to hospitals, and all the necessary things that we're going to need for that increasing elderly population in 15 years' time.
I think we do need that. I mean, at the moment we're talking about producing a 3-year plan, I think is our first step. And that would be a further forecast than has been done before. But you're right, the underlying issues, you need to look that far ahead. To train a nurse takes 3 years, to train a doctor far longer. So yes, we do need to have that long-term view. I'm just conscious that you're asking all the questions at the moment. I don't mind you asking questions, but do any other members of the public wish to ask any questions? Right, are you okay to carry on then?
I'll just briefly move you on, Mr. Chairman. I asked the question that you've given a written answer to on the total number of Isle of Man patient operations carried out in the UK. And I've added up all those figures that have been provided. We have a total number of operations carried out since the 1st of April 2021 of 8,196. Now, the question that I asked them was, what was the comparative cost, the average cost of an operation carried out in the Isle of Man as against an operation carried out currently in the UK? Because these are the kind of costs that are going to get hit by inflation. You've got your airfares and all the costs associated with taking 8,196 people to the UK just in the last year.
So that is part of what Director of Finance said is part of the overspend that we've got, is the increase in number of people who post-COVID are going for treatment to the UK. But Oliver, do you want to say anything else about the figures?
We don't have the data, unfortunately, to cost out the cost of each individual procedure that we undertake, so it's not possible to do a cost comparison. Although there's a piece of work that will help us start doing that, that's going to be associated with our development of our private patients offer, so that we can work out how much each procedure costs that we're going to offer privately. But yeah, as we've mentioned a few times, that has accelerated as the UK like us, have really invested in the recovery and restoration. But it's safe to say that the procedures that we do send off island are those ones that we know that we can't do on island, either because of the complexity of it, it's a service that we don't provide, or it's a procedure that we don't do enough of to maintain competency on the island.
So you've actually no control whatsoever over those particular costs?
I think that is the point, that we have not got control of the ones that go overseas, no.
And the other question, briefly, Mr. Chairman, is of those, I looked at the dashboard for the Qcq inspections. Did any of the organisations inspected actually pass the inspection without needing improvement notices served on them?
Well, none of the areas have had improvement notices served. All of them have been subject to a range of observations which are positive, areas that requires improvement, and a smaller number of escalations to DHSE, so that's true for all of them.
In primary care, what I can see, across the main range of subjects that they inspect, other than the direct personal contact with the patient, they were down somewhere near 10% of the figure for compliance.
I don't think it's possible to deduce that from my paper.
It's a very low figure for the GPs across the island.
I'm not sure it's possible to work that out. Oliver, I don't know if you've got any observations on that in primary care?
No.
I saw the dashboard sort of marked, and only the first one had been kind of possible.
I mean, there's absolutely, we were expecting to see in primary care, as probably across all of Manx care, lots and lots of areas that need improvement. And that's a positive, really, isn't it? Because I don't think any of us would assume that we're delivering healthcare perfectly. There's always room for improvement. In terms of breaking down, kind of assigning a score or a percentage to, I don't think that's necessarily helpful. I think what is helpful is that we are now in the position where we can identify areas that we can tackle and areas that we can work together to tackle that will make big improvements to the quality and safety and effectiveness of healthcare that's being delivered in primary care.
In particular, one of those areas would actually emergency medical care.
So the piece of work to analyse, to look at, say, in primary care, to look at all of those reports and identify and draw out themes, okay, that will then allow us will guide us as to where we should prioritise improvements. That's not happened. That's started, okay, but that piece of work is not complete yet. So I don't think we can make any comment yet about where the areas are that we need to concentrate on. But that piece of work is absolutely going to, you know, is ongoing, and we're going to be working together to.
Absolutely. I fear my report might not have been as helpful to you as I'd hoped, but I think it's fair to say the CQCs, the reason why they're here is to help us understand the gaps, and so it's absolutely right and proper and expected that they will reveal things. And the programme of inspections is really nowhere near completed yet, so they'll be very shortly going through mental health and through the hospital, and that intelligence that we'll gather from that will help us to determine what we do next. But
I'm afraid I need to bring this to an end now. I'm sorry, but we've now reached our time, and I didn't want to miss the opportunity. Sadly, Barbara has not arrived for whatever reason, but I just want to take the opportunity to record our thanks as an organisation and predecessors of Manx Care to Barbara for an extremely long career in which she did so many highly valuable things for healthcare on the island. And as Tim and I discovered when we met her successor yesterday, she has the solution to everything within her head, but fortunately she's going to stay on the end of the telephone for quite a long time to come. So let's just give our appreciation to a tremendous career delivering fantastic services for health and care on the island. Please record that. Thank you. Okay, now, members of the board, we're on a really tight schedule today. I want us to restart the next meeting just as soon as our colleagues have got the audio-visual stuff out of the way. So, quarter of an hour, 20 minutes or something like that is all you can have for lunch, but you can continue eating whilst we have the next meeting. Okay, thanks everybody.